Everything begins in a large and glorious mansion with pastel golden tones. A beautiful young woman with golden hair is asleep under the covers. Her expression twists, and she grumbles when she smells something. When she opened her eyes in that strange new place, the first thing she noticed were two women, an older one with white hair and a maid with dark hair, crying because the young lady had finally woken up, and also a kind of smell that caught her attention upon waking. Surprised by that sight, the older woman held the protagonist's face, desperate and relieved to see her face better, while a man appeared running because his daughter had opened her eyes. Despite the protagonist being confused, the woman hugged her, calling her by the name Nadia, still emotional, and she asks if Nadia knew how worried everyone had been, but Nadia was still smelling something strange and unpleasant. While the woman thanks her for returning to them, the others in the room remain equally emotional, crying. At first, she thought she was hallucinating with all these strange events, but when she looked into a hand mirror at her reflection, she noticed her appearance and tried to understand her new name and life as Nadia. She began by pinching her face and feeling pain, and she prayed for answers at the temple to understand what had happened, but nothing changed, and the protagonist felt completely defeated before this new world. So she began to consider that all this might be happening because of that comment she had posted before, waking up in that strange world. In the comment, she criticized that she wanted to read a more faithful reincarnation fantasy romance, and she did not regret that at all. She mentioned in the comment that if a person from the modern world returned to those times, they would find everything unsanitary to deal with, and there would be several adaptation problems. There was no sense of hygiene in the medieval age, and there was manure spread everywhere, which was a large part of the origin of the reader's criticisms, who felt it was an enormous change in the usual and current habits of humanity for someone from modern times to get used to, and she questions how funny it would be if a character reincarnated, tormented by so much filth, and says to let her know if they ever find a story like that. Despite that comment being funny, the spell backfired, and now the very person who made the criticism had ended up inside this not-at-all fun world. The protagonist has a crisis and grabs her hair in absolute desperation, wondering why all of this happened. After continuing to enter a state of nervousness, she freezes in place and looks back when she smells that strange scent again, guided by her nose. Realizing that its origin came from the dirty streets and from the people who walked calmly and elegantly through them as if it were completely normal. But not only that, they even stepped on the manure with total ease, which left Nadia disbelieving her own eyes. A reality she truly did not want to have happened. This made her run far away, disgusted, thinking she needed to hide before anyone noticed her. But it doesn't take long before someone calls out to speak with her. A noblewoman and a man comment that she should be there to pray at the temple, to Nadia's dismay for being found. Feeling a bit out of herself because of that terrible smell, she steps back and greets them feeling sick, and she almost even says they were stinky instead of dazzling. Nadia covers her nose, realizing she was in a terrible situation, and thought she would vomit at any moment with that mixture of manure and perfume. The lady asks if she is feeling well, fanning herself, and she agrees despite screaming internally that she was not well at all. The man asks if she is sick because she looks pale, and he offers to support her with his arm, but Nadia quickly refuses, pushing them away with one hand because it would be dangerous if he got closer, even if only for her sensitive nose. Suddenly, a gust of wind shakes the young lady's hair, and her ribbon flies into the air, along with the smell coming from that medieval couple, hitting the protagonist's nose directly, which almost makes her roll her eyes in nausea, thinking she might be able to handle it this time, and she faints right in front of both of them, making the two nobles crouch down to check if she was all right, noticing that she had indeed been feeling unwell from the beginning. Meanwhile, Nadia can only cry in sadness, laughing without any happiness because that was exactly why she told them not to come near her. In the end, the protagonist simply ends up fainting again under that pressure on her sense of smell. She covers her forehead with her arm, wondering if she was the only one affected by the bad smell, considering that their noses must not work properly. Until suddenly, she notices that someone had approached the bed where she was, and she looks to the side, surprised as she sits up, because she was smelling the scent of flowers coming from the person who had just appeared beside her, happy to see her awake. This person with reddish hair was Arwen Goldgate, the commander of the Imperial Knights, who says she heard that Nadia has been asking for many flowers recently, and smiles at her. Arwen had been worried about the news of her collapse during her trip with the Crown Prince, and she returned concerned to see her younger sister. Even noticing that Nadia was still pale when touching her face, she smiles as she agrees that she is fine now. The woman says that Lupin is also worried, but work at the Mage Tower was keeping him from returning home, though he is succeeding in his magical soul research. With that, she hugs the protagonist affectionately, calling her dear sister, wishing she could stay by her side to protect her. However, she should know that the family's top priority was Nadia's health and happiness, which left her surprised. At that moment, a new reality became clear to Nadia. Her older sister was the commander of the Knights and the heir to the Goldgate Duchy, while her younger brother was a renowned mage. Meanwhile, she was the second daughter of the Goldgate family, one of the only two duchies in the entire empire. So that should mean that her parents, the Duke and Duchess, had an enormous estate with several kind and attentive servants, which only made it even clearer that she had reincarnated into a cradle of gold. It seemed it was not a bad second life if she disregarded all the hygiene issues, and yet tears of sadness would not stop falling down her face. Above all, Nadia had entered a fantasy romance, which meant she should soon meet the male protagonist and live that love. Despite the super romantic imagery, she could imagine that she might endure that harsh reality with the power of love guiding her above all else. With that, she jumps up with a leap and a big smile on her face, determined to move forward with all of this somehow. Still, she freezes as she wonders where she might find her male protagonist. After all, she didn't even know what kind of story she had reincarnated into. Either way, she decides to look for him after a bath, to which Arwen asks where she is going, since she should remain resting in bed. But Nadia confirms she is feeling well, and since she broke out in a cold sweat after feeling nauseous, she decided to take a bath. After all, her future partner couldn't run away because of her stench. Until before she can do that, Arwen runs out and asks her to wait, beginning to talk about baths, but the protagonist holds the doorknob, not understanding the reason for the commotion, but her sister says that he was there, although Nadia had no idea who she was talking about, and when she opens the door, a young man with silver hair appears. With that, the two exchange glances, and the protagonist finally notices him behind the door she had just opened. Surprised because he certainly had the ideal face of a male protagonist for a fantasy romance. The young man with a gentle smile who appeared was Isaac, the doctor of the Goldgate family, which made her excited to meet her protagonist so soon. With that, Nadia gestures for him to come in, asking for a moment because she would wash herself before anything, and she smiles at the doctor. But to her surprise, Isaac holds her hand, telling her not to go, which makes her emotional because he was being so direct from the very beginning, and she decides to simply obey him, hearing from the doctor that she should not take any more baths, to which she happily agrees. Isaac guides her to the bed, saying that baths are strictly prohibited, and she keeps agreeing with a silly smile on her face. But while she is agreeing, she suddenly sits up shouting a big, "What?" suddenly understanding what she just heard. Then Isaac explains that the cause of her frequent fainting spells lately has been happening because of her baths, which leaves her completely paralyzed in surprise, and a loud scream of shock spreads throughout the mansion to the point that even the birds fly away in fear. Then the doctor speaks again that the cause of her fainting has been the baths, explaining patiently so she can understand. And that was probably the likely cause, but Nadia keeps staring at him without understanding how that could be possible, especially because he seemed like a charlatan. Then she mentions that it has been 2 days since the last time she washed her hair, and he smiles, saying that she was as clean as a whistle. Despite that, she smiles nervously and insists that it has been more than a week since she last took a bath, and he answers that this was exactly why she lost consciousness, to the point where Nadia simply screams, holding her own head as she says she feels itching everywhere as if insects were crawling on her, which did not worry the doctor at all, who merely agrees that it truly was unfortunate. But he smiles as he says that if she endures the slight discomfort of itching, it is better than dying because of a bath. After all, itching has never killed anyone. His insistence shakes Nadia to the point where her head spins, worrying Arwen. The protagonist tries to explain that it was nothing like that, but her sister is already standing up and shouting for Isaac to examine Nadia right away. And the doctor says that this could be a side effect of her baths, and therefore she should remain resting now, which makes Arwen insist that her sister follow Isaac's instructions, to Nadia's complete sadness, since no one was listening to her. Soon, she ends up back at square one. Even though she was the protagonist of a romantic fantasy, she might end up being the only one to never find love if she kept acting stubborn. She just needed to wait for the right moment to bring up the topic of baths again, and she decides to let the doctor take care of her while she remains in bed. He touches her forehead, and the protagonist is flooded by that terrible perfume smell that nearly kills her poor nose, making her bite her lips. Nadia wonders how much perfume he used that day, nearly fainting from the smell, worrying Isaac as he asks if her headache has gotten worse, which makes her sigh, looking away as she agrees, since that unbearable stench was the source of her headaches. Still, he leans closer to her, mentioning that she might also have a fever as he touches her face a little more, but she would probably be fine after resting a bit, which makes her heart pound like crazy. Then Arwen calls Isaac, making him move away from the protagonist after touching her, and she states that she appreciated him taking care of her sister like that. He says it was a great pleasure for him to be allowed to be there, smiling at Arwen. That was when she began asking if Viscount Isaac would like to go north with them as Nadia's personal doctor. Catching the protagonist by surprise, she wonders what exactly they meant by going north. Later, the older sister apologizes for throwing that on Nadia's shoulders, but she had been thinking that she could join her on her next mission. The protagonist hugs her pillow and asks what mission they were talking about, and Arwen explains that the season of prosperity was approaching, and as usual, their family had been summoned for the festival, and she was chosen to accompany the royal family as an escort. The festival would be held in the north this year, so she wanted her sister to go with her this time, thinking of it as a break for her recovery. The season of prosperity referred to the period from late autumn to early autumn, Every year, the Empress organizes the Prosperity Festival to pray for a rich harvest. It was a great opportunity to defend the family's honor, so the Gold Gates always took part to set an example for the other aristocrats. Even so, the protagonist was afraid of ruining something, since everyone seemed so nice, and when she expresses this concern, her sister holds her hands. But Arwen smiles, insisting that there was nothing to worry about, because she would always be at her sister's side, which hits Nadia's weak heart directly with her bold words. Despite her racing heart, the protagonist asks if the North was that large region with fewer people than the capital, and Arwen agrees that it was where the Cartane family lived. It was known for being cold and dry, but the weather was quite pleasant at that time of year despite being a bit windy, which catches the protagonist's attention. After thinking about that cold and dry weather, she can only swallow hard with her body tense, which could mean she could finally get rid of that terrible stench, seeming like a message from the heavens, making her happier than ever. Time passes and the journey north begins, with autumn leaves flying outside the carriage. During the trip, Nadia smiles to herself at the window, thinking that she already expected there to be a lot of wind, but even so, it was almost a bit too much because it felt more like a violent gale, beating against the carriage and making the leaves spin in circles outside. Suddenly, one of the knights points toward a storm forming ahead, so Arwen can see what was approaching them. Then she shouts for all capable knights to use their aura to alter the course, as she would protect the group from the front, while the rest should protect the royal family. The carriage ride made even the dishes tremble, and Nadia smiles nervously as she asks if the Empress is feeling well when she sees her shrinking back. With that, she stands and asks permission to approach the lady, saying it would be better if she lends her shoulder for her to use. Sitting beside the Empress, Nadia insists that the lady lean on her, smiling as she shows this kindness. The Empress does as she says and thanks her because she truly was very kind even when she was sick, suddenly hitting the protagonist with that strong odor again, which makes her cover her own mouth, trying to block the stench and murmuring back that she was fine, somehow miraculously. That was when voices shout that the tornado was approaching, and Arwen orders the knights to protect the carriage, drawing the attention of Nadia and the Empress. The wind hits them with full force to the point of the carriage doors flying open, allowing the air to rush inside. The sight of the door simply being blown away into the air, far away, leaves the two women tense inside the carriage. With that, Nadia stands up, worrying the elder woman as she asks where she thinks she is going when it is so dangerous. But she tells the Empress to hold on to the window ledge, as she would block the wind from the entrance, stopping near the carriage exit, which worries the older woman, because it was clearly too dangerous for her to risk herself like that just to protect her. Even so, Nadia smiles, saying everything would be fine because she was blessed with good luck, holding on to the edge of the carriage doorway. And there was no way she would be surprised by mere wind, or so she thought until the gust hit her full force, so strong it distorted her shape. This catches both the poor Empress and Arwen and the knights completely off guard, and they shout as they see the poor protagonist flying away. Meanwhile, a pair of horses is passing nearby, and a man with glasses notices something flying toward them and informs his companion. That something was none other than Nadia herself screaming, and he notices that it was apparently a person flying in their direction. But the other man with black hair grabs her in his arms just in time before she can fall hard onto the ground. Nadia is dizzy and slightly disoriented when she is caught, and the man notices she is not just a person, but rather some kind of beast they had caught in their arms, or at least that was what she seemed like after that powerful first impression. Meanwhile, the protagonist's mind wonders if she ended up falling into a tree, and still with her eyes closed, she is grateful because at least they saved her life. However, she hears someone saying he caught a monster for himself, leaving her confused. And the man in black says that if that is the case, then perhaps she should get down already. But despite that, he is still holding Nadia like a sack of potatoes. Realizing she was not caught by a tree, she quietly asks him to let her down, and he complains that he already intended to do that from the beginning. The tornadoes are still swirling around the carriage and the nearby horses, and the man continues carrying Nadia in his arms. He mentions that they would have to discuss this later, and he places her on his lap on the horse with a quick motion, putting her in a better position to ride, saying that if she wanted to avoid flying around again, she should hold on tight. He then draws his sword from its sheath, still leaving the protagonist surprised by everything suddenly happening. The man in black concentrates his powers into the sword, preparing for an attack movement, and then he launches a strike toward the tornado in front of them, passing by the horse they were riding, to hit the tornado directly, with a huge explosion of lightning and wind spreading in all directions. The man watches the chaos unfold with a bored expression while Nadia covers her ears from the noise. Until finally all that remains is the sword he had thrown toward the tornado before, and he tells the protagonist she may open her eyes now. Nadia opens her eyes and turns to the man, asking if it is over, and he replies that if she is referring to the tornado, then yes, which makes her smile in relief since everything was fine now, despite the man making a tense expression that he did not fully agree. Leaving Nadia confused, she wonders why he looked so angry. Considering that it must be because she still has not thanked him, she smiles even more at him and properly thanks him for rescuing her. Despite her bright smile, the man lets out a heavy sigh. He responds that it was indeed unpleasant, shattering her entire cheerful aura with just one word. And she replies that she didn't understand anything he just said, even though the man is still visibly bothered. He then justifies himself by saying that unless she has a mobility issue that prevents her from standing, he would like her to step away from him right now, staring at her with irritation. Nadia is shocked by how unpleasant she seemed in his eyes, and begins to consider that he might be a very particular type of person. So she grabs his wrist, making him shout and ask what she thought she was doing. The two squirm on top of the horse while he yells that she must have lost her mind for getting that close to him, and Nadia asks for just a moment because she wanted to check something. Then she takes the opportunity to smell him, surprised because she couldn't sense any bad odor coming from him. In the end, that man actually smelled good, but the scene only made him stare at her with pure disgust. Even so, Nadia was happy and smiling like an idiot, never feeling so at home in this world as she did now. With that, he becomes visibly more irritated, since he had repeated several times that he was uncomfortable with her presence, and she apologizes when she remembers that. She finally steps away, but not only that, she ruined everything by acting like a complete weirdo, and wonders what he must be thinking of her after seeing her behave like this. Suddenly, a voice calls out Nadia's name, and she turns around when she realizes she recognized that voice. Noticing that the one calling her was Arwen, who waves at her after seeing she was okay. Not only her, but the Empress was also on another horse, riding over to check if the protagonist was all right after flying off like that. With that, Nadia waves happily to let them know she was fine. But unintentionally, her heel hits the horse and it jerks violently, causing her to begin slipping off the horse. She slides with no preparation, falling backward with her arms up, not understanding anything, which makes her older sister scream and worry as she sees her falling. But before that can happen, the man is much faster in noticing her fall and grabs her by the waist. Like a scene worthy of a fantasy romance, he catches her in his arms and pulls her back onto the horse, saying she should be careful because horses are sensitive and it can be dangerous to startle them, making Nadia's heart race like crazy. He mentions that she didn't seem to be in her right mind to act like that, and should consider herself lucky to have been born into the aristocracy, giving her a lecture that makes her laugh nervously, wondering who would ever think kindly of her after she smelled him like that, acting like a total creep, which makes her feel like complete trash. Nadia apologizes for the way she behaved earlier, visibly nervous now that she realizes how strange her actions were, until she notices the man brushing the dust off the hand that had touched her before, almost seeming exaggerated from her point of view. That is when Arwen and the others arrive running, worried to know if she was all right. Her older sister smiles with relief when Nadia explains that everything worked out thanks to the knight behind her. The Empress says cheerfully that luckily everyone is safe, and asks if they could simply rest there for a moment. A little later, while recounting everything that happened, the Duke's assistant, Ba, tries to explain it all to the Duke. And the Empress smiles at the Duke because he appeared at the perfect moment, thanking him for everything, and he bows to her saying it was a great pleasure. Watching from a distance, Nadia is surprised because he was actually the famous Duke Cartain, Claude Cartain. This was the great hero who saved the North from a monster invasion. Nadia had heard that he had recently inherited the title of Duke, and despite thinking he would be older, he seemed quite young to be honored as a war hero, until that sparked an idea in her mind. Because Claude was a similar age to the female protagonist, and he was a duke who also happened to be a war hero. And most importantly of all, he was one of the only men who did not stink, thus making him, by excellence, the true male protagonist of that fantasy romance, and not the Dr. Isaac. Finally, the protagonist felt she had found her great love of her life, almost like in a true shoujo. Then Arwen approaches to thank him for saving Nadia's life, because as he must have noticed, she was super fragile. Even so, she insists that he owes her an apology for insulting her earlier, looking seriously at the Duke. From Arwen's point of view, he had intimidated Nadia like a caveman, claiming she should consider herself lucky to have been born into the aristocracy. Deep down, she did not like the Duke at all and viewed him as an adversary. The two stare intensely at each other, looking ready to kill someone, and Nadia feels things were getting ugly, leaving her worried because Arwen should have heard everything that happened between them earlier. But she did not know the whole story, and must have only seen the Duke speaking harshly to her poor younger sister. After all, above everything, Claude smelled very good, and that was his best quality in her eyes, and now she had practically become his dog. She wonders what she should do because she didn't want her historical romance to end right there. That was when someone extended a hand, apologizing for interrupting the conversation, because he wanted to offer a suggestion to resolve the impasse between Arwen and Claude. Herzan says that the Duke could make peace with Nadia back at the estate, the perfect solution since their carriage was missing a door. This only enrages both of them with Herzan's ridiculous suggestion, and Arwen refuses at all costs to let anything like that happen. With that, the two start arguing again with each other, which only makes the protagonist even more worried while the Empress laughs at the angry exchange, until Herzan claps, saying that both seem to have reached an agreement, making Claude sigh and Arwen attempt to object. But the Empress insists that he was right, and Arwen should not forget she was her escort and guard, which forces her to agree. Besides that, the matter could indeed be resolved by letting Nadia make the decision herself. So they wait to see what the protagonist would decide to do, making her hold her dress tightly, unsure of what to say. Later, Nadia is riding again with Claude on his horse, and the Duke apologizes if he disrespected her earlier. He confesses he was excessively rude, and she stammers as she agrees that it is fine, since she was the only one who owed him an apology, especially after the way she behaved near him, which embarrassed her even now. With that, Claude holds the reins to continue guiding the horse with Nadia in front of him, and asks for a moment. She thanks him for escorting her, smiling a bit at the almost romantic feeling. In any case, they continue riding together behind the carriage moving ahead. It does not take long before they return to the mansion, where Claude tells the Empress that the tornadoes were especially strong that year, and they should change the festival route. They gather for a discussion in a room where the Duke insists that instead of Xionia and traveling through the north, they could return to central Nadan and leave directly from there. The Empress considers it seriously, replying that Nadan would not receive her blessing at the peak of the season and holds her teacup, which makes Claude comment that he believed it was better to prioritize safety over the tour group. The Empress's blessing served as the very essence of the Festival of Prosperity, and many believed it was her blessing that granted them a rich harvest. It was also a great opportunity to display the family's ties to the imperial house, so Duke Cartain could not have made such a suggestion lightly, especially considering he oversaw that arid land in the north. Nadia simply watches the discussion, where Arwen says that the Goldgate family would also think of ways to help prepare for the festival, and the Empress thanks her for that. Then she decides to proceed with the Duke's suggestion to avoid risking the safety of her people, while the protagonist is only focused on grabbing more things to eat. The Empress says that in return she wants to make a suggestion, because since she would not be able to bless the region during the peak of the season, she wished to do what she could while she was there. While Nadia is discreetly trying to grab more cookies, the person who offers to help her take them more easily is Claude himself, discreetly pretending he had not done anything special while helping her. And then he focuses on the Empress's words. Listening to her suggests that she intended to move the ball to the first day of the season and receive them there in Nadan. And that was why she was thinking it would be wonderful if Nadia and Claude could attend together, which catches both of them off guard and does not exactly please either party at first impression. The Duke asks if the Empress wanted him to accompany Nadia to the ball, and she happily agrees that yes, that was exactly it. The Goldgate and Cartain families were two pillars of the imperial house's defense, and in her romantic imagination, there was nothing better to honor the occasion than the two of them together. Nadia nervously says that it truly was an honor, but her sister should be more suitable for that position, since she didn't even know how to dance. But the Empress insists there is no problem, because Arwen was her escort and would therefore be at her side the entire night. Claude intervenes with displeasure, mentioning that there was no need to break tradition, as he believed the ball should be held on the last day of the season as usual. The truth was that Claude hated crowded events, but the Empress smiles as she declares she did not mind breaking the curse. She could consider it a gesture of gratitude for the Duke's graciousness earlier, clearly not accepting no as an answer. This leaves the protagonist shaken, although Arwen touches her sister's hand, asking her not to mind her. After all, she was happy because she could see her younger sister dancing again, striking Nadia's fragile heart. In the end, the Duke can only sigh in defeat, agreeing, but having a request to make of Arwen, and it was that he would like her to entrust Nadia's preparations to him and comply with his requests. He states that his attendants would take care of her from beginning to end, including preparing her dress and tending to her needs. But most importantly of all, Claude wanted her to take a bath, a total of 3 times in hot water before she goes to the ball, leaving Arwen shocked. She becomes irritated because it sounded like an insult to their family, since Nadia was too weak to bathe when that was exactly what caused her fainting spells. Even so, the protagonist trembles when she realizes she cannot let that opportunity slip away. Despite the Duke and her sister continuing to argue intensely, she slams her fist on the table to get their attention, because it meant she could finally bathe, and she shouts that she was in love, catching everyone off guard, even though Nadia was referring to the baths and not the Duke. Still, she couldn't help but leap to her feet and slam her hands on the table, raising her voice as she yelled that she was in love. This breaks the atmosphere of the room, catching everyone by surprise and leaving them stunned at the protagonist's declaration. Arwen freezes as she asks if she was really in love, demanding to know with whom, while the poor Duke drinks his tea, pretending nothing was happening. But the Empress opens a big, goofy smile, already interpreting the situation on her own and making a rhetorical comment that she knew who it was. When the two women, cornering both Claude and Nadia, insist on knowing who it was, the protagonist hesitates and realizes what she has done. She sits back down, wondering what she had just done, because she could never say she was in love with bathing. Everyone would think she had gone insane. So all Nadia can do is hesitantly confess that she was in love with Duke Cartain, leaving the poor man in silence, nearly choking on his tea. Despite the lie, she claims she realized it when he rescued her, showering him with compliments because it could only be destiny bringing them together. It was extremely embarrassing, even for her older sister who twists in her seat in disappointment. Nadia wonders how she could escape from this, since a strange tension had settled in the room, so she raises her eyes to see how Claude was reacting. Doing so makes the two of them suddenly lock eyes, and they quickly turn their faces away, embarrassed. The protagonist knew she needed to pull herself together, because it was her own actions that put her in that situation. Crying would change nothing now. She also needed to secure her place as the Duke's partner, her chance for a bath, for the ball she would be attending, which fills her with determination. With that, Nadia begins apologizing to Arwen, making her sister look at her as she realizes her regret. She asks if she truly intended to attend the ball with the Duke, even if it meant taking those 3 dangerous baths, which makes Nadia apologize, because she understood Arwen's concern for her health. And she also knew how worried the entire family had been about her health given all the commotion at the beginning, but she still wanted to stand by the Duke's side and dance with him at that ball, so the two sisters hold each other's hands as they talk. After all, Arwen herself must have seen that she did not faint or get sick even once during their journey. So this time, Nadia wanted to challenge herself by taking a bath, smiling as she declares she would no longer run from it and wanted to turn over a new leaf. Her older sister sighs and smiles back, agreeing that if that was how she felt, then she could not stop her, which makes the protagonist thank her for understanding. The Empress sheds tears of emotion at the scene between the sisters, catching them by surprise with her dramatic reaction. In any case, Arwen stands to negotiate with Claude, stating that they would accept his demands, but with one condition. Seeing her extend her hand toward him, he crosses his arms and asks what that condition would be. She says that whenever Nadia takes a bath, they will examine her physical condition, something that would obviously be handled by the family doctor. That said, if Nadia's condition worsens even slightly, the baths should be stopped immediately. Arwen asks if he accepts the condition, placing her hand on the protagonist's shoulder, who waits anxiously for the Duke's answer. After observing her, he slowly agrees, smiling back calmly. But Nadia is surprised by how quickly he accepted, giving the Empress an opportunity to clap excitedly. That is when Herzan approaches, apologizing for the interruption because he had a message for the Duke. He leans in to whisper something in his ear about it being time for something. Then Claude looks at his watch, commenting that he had noticed how late it had gotten. That is when he notices Nadia distracted, staring at the cookies on the table again. But since the protagonist does not notice, the Duke is able to stare directly at her, and even Herzan sees it, giving a slight smile. Then the Empress suggests to Arwen that it is time for them to leave as well, and both she and Nadia agree to the royal command. Thus the women stand and leave, with the protagonist still smiling from ear to ear, wanting to hurry so everything would go well. That is when something takes her by surprise. A hand moves in front of Nadia to close the door before she can leave with Arwen and the Empress. Not only that, but after closing the door, Claude says there were still unresolved matters they needed to address, making her nervous. Then the Duke directly asks if it was true that she was in love with him, observing her as she blushes slightly under the pressure of his attention. Nadia scratches the back of her neck and sighs as she replies that she didn't know he would be so straightforward. But if he truly wanted to know, she continues pretending and puts on an entire dramatic show as she agrees it was indeed true, even pretending to shoot him with a love arrow. As the two stare at each other in a strange coldness, she wonders if she wasn't convincing enough. So she decides to act even more dramatically, gesturing hearts and exaggerating even further to confess that she loved him from the bottom of her heart. Instead of being convinced, the Duke simply turns to open the door in silence, and then lets out a sigh that sounded almost tired after witnessing all that drama. Completely cold, he leaves the hall with a violent slam of the door while the poor protagonist is still standing there, arms raised in a heart gesture. Deep down, she shrinks with her face completely red from embarrassment, after having humiliated herself in front of him. She wonders what would happen if he decided to get rid of her before she even had the chance to dance with him, worried about her bath. Time passes until the fateful and long-awaited day of the bath, when the maids inform her that everything her lady requested had been prepared. Nadia opens a huge smile, saying it was perfect, seeming it would be enough for now, putting her hands on her waist as she laughs with her maid, ready to begin. The two admire all the makeup, perfumes, and jewelry on the table, which the maid praises as looking wonderful on Nadia. The protagonist asks if it was true, and the servant smiles, saying absolutely yes, feeling as if she were looking at a bouquet of beautiful flowers. Even so, she felt wonderful after taking the 3 baths, wearing a dress full of flowers so she would smell very good, filling her with determination. Thus, the ball finally arrives and Nadia is sent into the hall, where several couples with that terrible smell are gathered. The protagonist stays focused on the scent of her dress, relieved that it worked like an anti-stench charm. That is when a woman dressed in gold approaches everyone in the hall, walking in her heels, and extending her hand as she, the Empress, announces she is delighted to open the Festival of Prosperity there in Nadan, the heart of the North. Before beginning the festivities, she would like to grant the ruler of those lands great abundance and prosperity, asking for Duke Cartain to come forward. With that, Nadia lifts her eyes as Claude walks past her, stealing her attention and that of many around them. The Empress announces that he, as the ruler, has cared for that region with great devotion and loyalty. Praying for the heavens to recognize his hard work and bless those vast lands with prosperity, the Duke kneels before the Empress. Saying he would not take such a blessing for granted, he rises again and turns toward the people in the hall. Then he walks slowly back in Nadia's direction. He extends his hand to her, asking her to join him in the celebration, which makes her extend her hand as well to take his. Agreeing that she would be delighted to go, their hands touch. As they begin to dance beside the other couples, the Duke asks if she was feeling nervous, and Nadia stammers as she denies it. But it was clear to him she was trying to hide the truth, and he asked her to relax and breathe, because he was inexperienced in dancing and feared that she might need to lead, which catches Nadia completely off guard. In the end, the Duke compliments her because she was better than he expected, and he smiles at the protagonist during the dance. Before she realizes it, Nadia is fully immersed in the Duke's arms, and she replies that she could say the same about him without hesitation. Their fingers intertwine, drawing the attention of the other nobles watching their dance. Everyone applauds the Duke's dance with Nadia, praising her because she was always a graceful dancer. The protagonist smiles and thanks them, feeling that everything had been going very well so far. But she could not endure those people getting close because of their smell, especially when they began praising Claude's performance. To her surprise, even the poor Duke was almost sick from the stench, suffering even more than she was since she had her flower dress amulet. That is when a clearly sweaty man runs toward them, wanting to hug Claude and asking if he had been well, catching the Duke completely off guard, and Nadia was certain he was about to vomit from that smell. It was a crisis waiting to explode, so she had to do something to stop it. Thus, she reached out her hands toward Claude and pulled him close, leaving all the nobles frozen as they watched the romantic-looking scene unfolding in the middle of the hall. But Nadia removes a flower from her hair and places it on the Duke's clothing, tucking it perfectly into one of his pockets, suggesting that now he would feel better, smiling when the flower's fragrance drifted toward his nose. Then she whispers something into Claude's ear, which leaves him completely shocked. Gesturing nervously, she asks him to join her outside on the balcony. Thus, the couple leaves the hall to breathe the fresh air outside. In the night, Nadia sighs in relief because the northern wind truly was the best for driving away those terrible odors. That is when Claude asks her to explain better what she meant earlier about it bothering her as well. But it was exactly what she had whispered into the Duke's ear. Be it the dirty and grimy fingernails of Countess Tail, the dandruff dusting the head and shoulders of Viscountess Jennet, or that stench circulating in the ballroom, all of it bothered Nadia just as much as it bothered the Duke himself. Claude asks if she truly felt the same and was not just pretending, which surprises her. It seemed that hard for him to believe. So she shows him a toothpaste she made herself, a mixture of baked salt and mint into which she poured her heart and soul, along with that dress made especially for the ball using real flowers to protect herself from that terrible night. While she searches for more proof, Claude interrupts her saying that is enough, and apologizes as he steps closer, because he had suspected more than necessary, but was glad to know they were alike in this. Relieved that the baths he made her take did not cause her discomfort, something that makes Nadia curious because he sounds worried, he admits that perhaps just a little. Nadia knew it must have been difficult for him, especially considering his position as a duke. Claude mentions that many people constantly try to stop him from bathing too much, and many more always speak ill of him for it. Everyone thought he was hallucinating, that he constantly washed because he lost his sanity after being covered in blood on the battlefield. The protagonist states that now there were two of them with the same olfactory sensitivity, so things could gradually improve. After all, she understood him. Indeed, the Duke smiles as he agrees that perhaps things really could change, catching her by surprise by showing a smile. The cold, heartless Duke had just smiled at her, but he says she must have experienced something similar, though her parents seemed especially worried. That was because people said no woman would feel attracted to a man who bathes daily, which leaves Nadia surprised by such a claim. It makes her hold his hand under the moonlight, completely shocking him, especially when she proposes to him out of nowhere, completely on the offensive. But the truth was that Nadia wanted to marry Claude so they could take 2 baths per day together. The explanation does not seem to please the Duke, and Nadia wonders why he has gone silent, perhaps meaning a big no. With that in mind, she decides to step back so she can use her secret weapon, her handmade sea salt and mint toothpaste. Kneeling, she asks him to accept it as a wedding gift instead of a ring. When Claude crosses his arms and simply watches, he sighs with a faint laugh, finding her truly interesting. He helps her stand, saying that taking only 2 baths a day may not work, which worries her about a possible rejection. But Claude explains that it would be too much of a waste after everything, giving Nadia hope with his answer, until he finally declines her proposal, disappointing her when she asks him why. And the Duke says it should be obvious. They didn't even know each other yet, and it seemed strange to marry someone he barely knew to spend the rest of his life with. He states that Nadia caught his attention many times in many ways beyond that party, just as a breeze passes through her golden hair, and he knew she might be the only person out there who would understand him regarding the foul odors. And ideally, the person he falls in love with should accept him. But if Claude were to choose a wife based solely on that, he would have held a bathing contest. And with that, he removes a flower petal from the protagonist's hair, Even so, he bows in appreciation of her courage to propose to him and apologizes for not being able to reciprocate as she wished. Still, he would gladly accept the flower Nadia had given him at the party, bringing it to his nose, mentioning it was quite the exotic situation. Later, in her mansion, the protagonist writhes on the bed as she realizes she is in serious trouble, for the Duke had rejected her directly, leaving her unable to oppose or say anything more to convince him. It was so embarrassing that her eyes filled with tears just remembering it, not only because the Duke had very valid reasons to refuse her proposal, but also because her heart raced when he gave her that ambiguous compliment. Looking at the ceiling, Nadia realizes that just thinking about it makes her heart pound violently in her chest. But she quickly sits up, questioning what happened, because she was supposed to be in a romantic fantasy novel. Yet the script was completely different from anything she had read. What she knew about romantic novels was that there were several types. The first, where characters have many opportunities to fall in love in emotional scenes. The second, where a marriage of convenience happens first, and only later do they fall in love and make the marriage official. And above all, the male protagonist was usually a Grand Duke from the northern region with an eccentric personality, just like Claude. But that Duke was excessively rational, and because of that, her story ended up forcing the character to have far too much common sense, ruining her plans. With her proposal denied, Nadia curls up in bed, whimpering as she wonders why she was the only one who developed feelings. Unable to hold back the tears from the painful rejection, because in the end, some spark of emotion had indeed been born in her. She sighs when she smells the nice scent of her clothes and wonders how she could live without that cleanliness and fragrance in her life. But she refuses to let herself be defeated by this, because at least she could try convincing the Duke later, determined to face the war of love. It was impossible for her to give up just because she was rejected once. That same night, the protagonist puts on a blue dress and rehearses what she would say to the Duke in front of his bedroom door, wanting a chance to court him. Then, nervously, she prepares to knock on the door, believing that practice should be enough for her plan to progress little by little. As soon as she knocks, a voice says she may enter, whoever she was. Nadia enters the Duke's luxurious room full of white and gold furniture, and the Duke himself, wearing only a white bathrobe and covering his head with a towel, says that Herzan is late, without even looking to see who is at the door, saying that if he was there to stop him from taking a bath, it was impossible, until Nadia freezes in place upon seeing the Duke coming down in such an exposed state after bathing. Claude is surprised to see Nadia there, especially when her whole face turns red and she covers it with her hands. Peeking between her fingers at the sight of the Duke with his chest exposed, he continues questioning what she was doing there, but she keeps shielding her vision with her arms, murmuring for him to first do something about his robe, which exposed too much of his body. Claude then covers himself, commenting that it was quite the surprise to see her so late at night. In the end, the two sit down to talk on two sofas, and the Duke asks what he could do for her. But at this point, Nadia was far too affected to manage to speak what she had rehearsed for so long. She squeezes her fingers into her dress as she asks what he knows about love, leaving him curious about the topic, until she explains she has been thinking a lot about it recently, and despite him refusing her proposal, she understood his reasons. Even so, love was not something that would strike him overnight out of nowhere, she insists, despite being the very person who had fired a marriage proposal suddenly. Nadia believed that when two people spend enough time together to truly get to know each other, there is a chance they might fall in love. The Duke asks her to continue, although he seems a little lost in her reasoning, so she asks if there was a chance he could give her that opportunity. The protagonist stands and asks him to let her remain there in the north for a little longer, so he could get to know her properly. She insists while gesturing with her hands. Still serious, the Duke asks if that was truly her desire, and she agrees after a moment. But nervously, she mentions she would like to be able to court him during her stay in the house, fidgeting adorably with her fingers, which makes Claude stare at her deeply, and the protagonist almost regrets rushing into such a request. In the end, he sighs and agrees that she may remain at the Cartain residence until the Empress's journey is complete, especially considering the favor she did during the ball. But he would only accept on the condition that she obtain Arwen's permission first, and the task of earning her approval belonged solely to Nadia. She smiles as she agrees, since they also had to consider their families' reputations, and she gives her word that she will resolve that matter. Then she rises from the sofa again and comments on the flower she gave him earlier and how he kept it on his desk until now, in a white vase. Nadia smiles and says she only mentioned it because she liked the sight. Then she hops out of the Duke's room while he simply watches her in silence, chuckling to himself. A few days later, the protagonist is still at the Duke's mansion, this time wearing different clothes and with her hair tied up. Holding her wooden sword in place to strike her blow, she finally advances to attack the training dummy with a slash. She hits it and closes her eyes, but the movement was so weak that the sword nearly flew out of her hands, leaving the onlookers a little stunned, especially because the wooden sword flew extremely far, a nearly ridiculous scene to witness. Nadia's hands tremble, and even she is shocked by what just happened. She bends down after letting out a cry of pain as her hands had been injured in the process of striking the training dummy. Then Arwen approaches and says there was still time for her to give up her decision, but if she truly wanted to stay behind, she would not relent just because she was her younger sister. Nadia picks up the wooden sword again and declares she won't give up, which makes Arwen respect her decision, ordering her to stand and continue with 15 more sets of diagonal slashes on the training dummy. The older sister watches the younger one train, thinking she was truly willing to endure so many hardships all for that man, the Duke. Claude watches the protagonist train, while Arwen still wonders why she wanted to stay by his side of all people in the world. And she remembers how she erupted when Nadia told her she wanted to stay at the Duke's mansion, asking her the reason for that. And the protagonist apologizes, explaining that she did not want to lie to her sister. Arwen asks if she forgot how Nadia had been insulted, and the protagonist nervously tries to explain that it was a misunderstanding. The truth was that Arwen never liked Claude Cartain since the moment she first met him, but still tried to consider him out of pure respect as a knight. But even after everything that happened before, he forced Nadia to risk her well-being for his own benefit, and now she was pushing herself through sword training. Arwen reminds her that she should move with strength from her core, not her arms, to strike with the sword, while the protagonist wipes the sweat from her face, panting. And she says they still had 5 more sets for Nadia to complete, ordering her to continue with authority. Despite her mind questioning how Claude could force a fragile young woman who could barely handle taking a bath to take even more baths after that. Above all, if only Nadia knew what the Duke said after her love confession, she would not be acting like this. And Arwen remembers Claude saying they should avoid trouble by pretending Nadia's confession never happened, which infuriated her because he spoke as if Nadia were a problem. She could not bear the future pain Claude might cause her younger sister if they stayed together. In the present, she continues instructing Nadia in her training again and again with each swing of the wooden sword. Meanwhile, the protagonist feels happy because she managed to hit all the targets that time, but she ends up losing her balance after moving so much, falling to the ground under Arwen's gaze, who comments on how weak she was, and that this was precisely why she could not allow Nadia to stay there on her own. That was why Arwen decided to become harsher with her younger sister. For the first time in her entire life, Nadia stands up and asks if she would grant her permission to stay if she proved strong enough. And Arwen agrees, but questions how she intends to do that. To which the protagonist insists that her older sister could set the challenge however she wished, and she would do everything she said. So Arwen decides that on the morning they depart, she would challenge her to a duel, and if Nadia wins, she may do whatever she wants, and Arwen will say nothing more about her decisions. Thus, Arwen asks a silver-haired man named Joel to take care of the rest of her younger sister's training. She leaves the training grounds with a serious expression, even as she hears Nadia panting from exhaustion. She then looks at the Duke with pure fury, and he returns her stare with that cold, unshakable gaze. When he asks if she could not go easier on Nadia since her hands were trembling like leaves, Arwen answers it was none of his business. She walks past the Duke and heads toward Isaac, who watches the training from farther back, and she asks him to check Nadia's hands once the training ends, and he agrees. The duel was 2 weeks away, and thus the protagonist's training continued intensely. As she strikes Joel's wooden sword during training, he instructs her to keep her strength in the movement, or he would make her repeat the 5 sets of attacks again. He smiles as the protagonist keeps pushing herself like crazy, delivering stronger and stronger blows as time passes. But even Nadia's strongest attacks feel like a breeze to Joel, who is practically drinking tea with how calm he is while guiding her training. The phrase, "last strike," sounds absurd for the protagonist's trembling body, clearly exhausted, but Joel smiles as if it were nothing and agrees. Suddenly, this enrages Nadia to the point she says he must be mocking her, and Joel agrees they could end the training for now, prioritizing their lives, although the protagonist realizes she almost cursed at him. A little later, the Duke returns to his residence, with Herzan mentioning that Nadia has been training vigorously every day. Apparently, the training sessions have been extremely intense for someone with such a weak body. He feared she was struggling far more than she should, and as an alternative, he suggests the Duke reject Nadia's previous request altogether. The Duke sits in silence, and Herzan asks if he was even being heard, which irritates Claude because it sounded like he was being lectured, though the assistant quickly denies it. Claude rests his forehead on his hand, sighing because, although he did ask Nadia to gain her sister's approval, he never told her to duel. Not sure if he deserved to hear a sermon from Herzan, the man replies he did not intend to blame him. He simply felt concern and sympathy for Nadia. With that, the Duke gestures for him to leave, because he was going to bathe, surprising Herzan, who notes he was going to take another bath. But Claude still enters his enormous bathtub, sinking his body down to his hips and relaxing. Recalling Herzan's words, he wonders why he had been feeling pity and concern for the protagonist. Suddenly, he hears voices of someone running after Nadia, worried because she was mumbling about being sore and covered in sweat. The maid helps Nadia walk, letting her lean on her wooden sword as she passes along the road below the Duke's bathroom window. Meanwhile, Isaac approaches to speak with the protagonist, who looked completely destroyed after training. This makes Claude fall silent, reflecting on Herzan's worried words, and then he takes a vial containing a purple liquid, realizing he felt the same. The next morning, Nadia still feels exhausted, her entire body aching, practically hugging the training dummy. That's when she hears a voice saying she looked deplorable, which catches her attention, and makes her look at the Duke with a gleam of surprise in her eyes. Claude mentions he heard about Nadia's duel with Arwen, and the protagonist agrees, but says she still needs to land a proper hit to win. The Duke says he didn't want things to go that far, asking how she was enduring all of this, which makes Nadia smile as she asks if he was worried about her. Then she comments that she noticed his eyes were beautiful, like they held a galaxy full of stars, enough to get lost in them. Catching the Duke completely off guard, he asks how Nadia could say something like that without feeling embarrassed, and the protagonist replies by asking what there was to be embarrassed about. In the end, Claude can only sigh and wave his hand to tell her to stay away, unable to define her with any fitting word. The protagonist remembers he always repeated no several times to her and asks if he finds her that repulsive, and the Duke sighs because she knew it wasn't anything like that. This brightens her instantly, and Nadia asks if she could request permission for something else as the sun sets. The Duke touches his own hair, asking what it was. So long as it wasn't another marriage proposal, he could consider it. So she nervously asks if he would allow her to take a bath after her training sessions, and he agrees immediately, which makes her extremely happy, thrilled with the chance to stay clean after all the sweating. Then Claude takes out that glass vial with the purple liquid, offering it to the protagonist. He explains it was water mixed with mint, lemon, and wine that he had prepared and usually used. Scratching his neck with a faint blush, the Duke says his mouth tends to get dry during training, and the mixture might offer her some comfort. This touches Nadia's heart, and she thanks him for his kindness with a big, sweet, affectionate smile. She promises to repay him with her victory, which makes the Duke laugh, questioning if she could really defeat Arwen in her current state. Then he discreetly mentions that starting tomorrow, he will wait for her there an hour earlier, because he will help her with extra lessons. This takes Nadia's fragile heart by surprise, because it clearly sounded like a love declaration. While the Duke wonders why she reacted so intensely, he corrects himself, explaining he didn't mean to belittle her efforts in training alone, nor did she have to feel obligated to accept. But Nadia interrupts him by shouting that she absolutely wanted it, without a doubt. So Claude warns her that he wasn't a gentle instructor, and she shouldn't regret her decision, something Nadia was sure she would never regret. This brings a smile to the Duke as he crosses his arms, while the protagonist laments the day she ever uttered those words. On another day, the poor girl was collapsed on the ground, with Claude demanding much more from her movements. 30 strikes and blocks plus specific instructions. With a shout, the Duke orders her to move, and she gets up with difficulty, leaning on her wooden sword, before jumping forward to attack the Duke, wanting to slap herself for being so stupid to accept these lessons, nearly dying from all the effort. With only 30 minutes left until training ended, the Duke asks if she gives up. Nadia refuses even though she's lying on the ground, practically dying for air. Claude orders her to get up even if she can't, which makes her irritated and ready to scream 30 different curses. But before she realizes it, the days pass, and finally only one day remained until her duel with Arwen, and the protagonist finds herself walking through one of the corridors, still exhausted from training, with her ankle slightly sore and her whole body trembling. Despite her trembling feet, the duel was the next day, and Nadia couldn't afford to lose a day of training. Maybe she could ask Duke Cartain to go a little easier on her that day, or maybe not, considering how frightening he was and how he probably hated complaints. She decides to hurry so she can finish everything at once, returning to her training. While walking through the corridors, the physician Isaac was gathering some flowers to make a bouquet and noticed her passing in the distance. He raises his hand and waves excitedly at the protagonist, calling her name and catching her by surprise. Isaac approaches just as Nadia asks what he was doing there so early in the morning, smiling at the doctor. He explains he was just picking some herbs he needed for his remedies, running a hand through his silver hair, and he asks if Nadia was injured, remembering her harsh training and how much effort she had put in during those weeks. She nervously replies that she may have twisted her ankle the day before, leaving the doctor with a worried expression. He suggests she should be resting that day and asks if he may take a look at her ankle. The protagonist sits on a bench and allows the doctor to kneel to examine the injury on her leg. He carefully touches the reddened ankle, making Nadia let out a small cry of pain from the mere touch. Isaac says it was concerning, as he wasn't sure she could surpass her sister in that condition, which makes her question whether he was actually cheering for her. This draws a sweet smile from the doctor because if he had to choose, he hoped the protagonist would come out unscathed regardless of the result. This teases Nadia's heart because if he said something like that with such a cute face, she might get the wrong idea. And clearly the Duke wouldn't agree with that. This embarrasses the doctor, who gestures for her not to give him too much attention, as he was only concerned as her physician, making Nadia let out an awkward laugh. But Isaac insists that her ankle was in a worrying state, and it would be better for her to rest, something the protagonist explains she cannot do, and he asks if it was all because of Duke Cartain, which makes her agree since Nadia had been of great help to him lately. Isaac asks if she wanted to remain in the north just because of Claude, something that confuses the protagonist. She wonders why Isaac was referring to the Duke in such a strange way, as if holding something inside. So she answers nervously that it was a somewhat personal matter to reveal. Isaac laughs a little, apologizing for overstepping with his questions, and asks her to forget everything he just said. Still, he decides he will bandage Nadia's ankle to help with the pain, showing kindness as he picks up the bandage. This reassures her, because deep down the protagonist knew he was only worried about her because she was his patient. And Nadia says she hoped the Duke could show at least half the kindness Isaac showed just now, which he takes as a compliment while wrapping her ankle. But when he lifts his gaze, the doctor freezes in place upon seeing someone standing behind her bench, while the protagonist remains confused by his reaction. She hoped it wasn't because her feet smelled or something while he was tending to her injury, but the doctor points to what was behind her, making her finally turn around without understanding the reason for his fear. And she sees a Duke with crossed arms, observing the scene with a cold gaze that frightens her. Claude mentions he came to find her since she hadn't shown up for training, only to find her playing around all this time, looking furious. Later, he was walking ahead of her, angry about what he had seen, and Nadia followed him down the corridor. Trying to pretend nothing happened, she asks if they weren't going to train that day, but he stays silent. So she puts on a friendly smile and insists on calling his name, making him finally begin to speak. Turning toward her, he asks if he was truly the only person Nadia wanted to court, leaving her confused. And she agrees that it was only the Duke, making a finger gun of love as she was clearly ready to flirt only with him. After seeing the joy on Nadia's face about starting training, Claude sighs with exhaustion, and he glances at her leg, beginning to say that regardless of who her opponent may be, everyone would always be stronger than her. That was simply a fact. Additionally, she needed to focus on her balance and on the distance between herself and her opponent, aiming for the exact moment the opponent lowered their guard. The Duke insists there is no room for human emotions, and she should go into battle with the mindset that she could lose her life if she failed, even if her opponent was Arwen. That would be all the lesson he would give that day, and he suggests that Nadia should rest a little. She asks if they couldn't have more duel practice, following him when he starts walking again, but the Duke insists this was the end of their training together. Though Nadia's performance had been very good, the protagonist reaches out her hand, asking him to wait when he begins walking away quickly. But since Claude simply left, the protagonist could only take a bluish object from her pocket, sad because she couldn't give him her gift. Later in her bath, the protagonist wonders why the Duke was so furious with her to that extent. Poking the rubber duck in the bath, she looks at the gift she made for him, resting beside the tub. She wonders if she should really give that to Claude or not, frustrated after their previous interaction. After thinking for a while, Nadia holds one of the bath flowers in her palm, deciding she would make a conscious decision. She begins plucking the petals, playing He Loves Me Not, to decide whether she would give the gift or not. The petals scatter across the bathwater around her until she finally decides that yes, she would give the gift. When she leaves the bath and gets dressed, she panics as the door opens slowly behind her after she sneaks into the Duke's room to place the gift on his desk. A person enters the room asking what Nadia was doing, rummaging through his documents. She turns around, nervous and cautious, mentioning that the Duke returned much earlier than she expected. Claude notices something and approaches the desk, walking past the protagonist while agreeing dismissively with her comment. He focuses on picking up the gift she left on his table, bringing it close to his face to examine it with curiosity. While Nadia tries to justify herself, nervous from being caught in the act while trying to give him the gift discreetly, he asks if this was her second attempt at proposing marriage, stepping a bit closer to Nadia, which makes her face burn red as she denies it, and the Duke crosses his arms, asking if it was a premature farewell gift, which she also denies. She explains it was simply a token of appreciation because she wanted to thank him for helping her these last few days, fidgeting with her braid from nervousness. The Duke now understands and opens the object to rub the powder on his fingers, sniffing it in a way that irritates the protagonist, as if checking whether it was poisoned. She says that if he didn't like it, he should return it immediately, but he lifts the gift out of her reach, saying he did like it. In fact, he liked it quite a lot, and he smiles at the protagonist while looking at the object, making her blush slightly. Then she mentions that earlier that day he must have been irritated with her, which confuses him. Nadia explains about the way he acted before, but the Duke crosses his arms, asking if he truly looked so irritated. He then says he was only worried about her injured ankle, extending his hand to touch hers. He lifts the protagonist's hand to his lips, placing a kiss on it that catches her completely off guard, sending shivers down her spine. Her face turns bright red again, stammering as she questions his actions, not understanding any of it. But the Duke asks why she was so flustered, saying it was merely his way of showing gratitude for the precious gift, melting the poor girl's mind, disappointed that it was just gratitude, even though Claude asks if she had been expecting something more. He steps away from her while the protagonist tries to deny it and explain herself, but the Duke says she should retire for the night because she needed rest for the duel. It was unfair of Claude to be so handsome and have the voice of her dreams, yet only Nadia reacted with butterflies in her stomach from a simple hand kiss. It seemed the Duke didn't think she could be flustered worthy too, so while he began to undress, the protagonist approached him, asking if he would like to test the effectiveness of the mouthwash, confusing him because it was so sudden. But Nadia insists, turning him toward her as she grabs his shirt near the desk, trying to throw herself at him. She leans close to him, saying he should use it and no one would notice anything, even being so close to each other. Therefore, he should test it next time, pushing him slightly against the desk with a persuasive smile. As she begins her plan to try seducing the Duke, Nadia comments that his eyes looked even more beautiful that night. But the Duke shatters her confidence by mentioning that her feet seemed fine for the next day's duel, once again being a shell far too hard for Nadia to crack. This makes her question whether he really wanted to talk about the duel while he was half naked and she was throwing herself at him so shamelessly. In the end, only Nadia ends up embarrassed when Claude begins saying her grip wasn't strong enough, and she becomes nervous upon realizing they were far too close, while wondering how she could have her heart racing when she was the one who started flirting in the first place. She suddenly runs out of the room when she mentions the time, shouting that she should return to bed because she needed to prepare for the duel. In the end, she leaves so fast that Claude only watches silently as she disappears from his room, slamming the door as she goes. Finally, the day of the duel arrives, and they announce that the rumors about Nadia challenging Arwen were true. With her wooden sword, she prepares to meet her sister and begin the duel, properly dressed, until someone approaches her from behind, calling her name and touching her shoulder. Arwen walks past her younger sister, asking her to be careful not to get hurt, which leaves Nadia speechless, before tightening her grip on her wooden sword, wishing the same to her older sister, trying not to feel afraid. After all, Nadia had refined her skills during the last few weeks of training, and it was time to show everyone the results. Ready to prove her own strength and independence, the protagonist reaffirms herself before the duel against Arwen so she can stay in the mansion beside the Duke. Our beautiful protagonist peeks stealthily over a wall. Seeing the crowd, she is shocked by how many people have gathered. Just a few seconds ago, she was confident, but now she is extremely nervous and can't stop trembling. Because of her nerves, she ends up tripping on the loose lace of her boot. Startled, she tries to regain her balance using her wooden sword. Failing miserably, she falls to her knees in embarrassment as someone approaches to help her. Seeing who it is, her cheeks turn red and her eyes sparkle like stars. It is Duke Cartain, in elegant clothing, who kneels beside her to assist her. He warns her that she should tie her boots properly, since he doesn't want her to injure her ankle again. Commenting on the girl's silence, he assumes she is nervous, and says she just needs to do the same thing they practiced the previous night, and she'll win. With her face red, she says it isn't kind to be so attentive to someone he rejected. Looking at her confidently, he wishes her good luck. Already in the combat arena, the crowd cheers loudly as Nadia and the red-haired girl prepare for the fight. Confidently, the red-haired woman asks the protagonist if she's ready, and Nadia confirms, paying close attention to the movements of the fire-haired woman, who leaps forward, raising her sword and proposing they begin the match, charging at the protagonist with speed. In the air, she prepares her strike to attack our Nadia, who is startled and readies herself to defend. The strike comes fiercely, and Nadia blocks it on reflex. She feels her arm throb from the force of the blow, and in her thoughts, she says her goal is only to land a single hit, not defeat her sister. While thinking about what she needs to do, her sister quickly retreats. Finishing her thought, Nadia concludes she needs to focus on her target and attack as fast as possible, rotating her sword in her hand. This time she moves in to attack her sister, only to have her strike easily blocked. Arwen is surprised by her younger sister's speed, though she remains confident. Nadia's hands tremble, making it clear she won't last much longer. She glances at the handsome Duke Claude Cartane while the duel continues, remembering the advice he once gave her, that she should create distance between them because she could not withstand Arwen's sword. He warned her that the key to any strategy leading to victory was to use her mind. With all his beauty and defined chest, he watches eagerly to see what strategies she will create during the fight. Realizing that at the current pace she would never win, she begins pressuring herself to think. As she sweats from exhaustion, she seems to have an idea for the battle. At that moment, she weakens her grip and lowers her sword. Dropping the sword like that is something only a novice would do, and naturally Arwen will worry, giving Nadia the chance to exploit her lowered guard. The protagonist pulls her sister closer by the shirt, catching her completely by surprise. Her sister is utterly confused while the girl smiles with a victorious expression. Nadia managed to touch the tip of her wooden sword to her opponent's foot. Everyone in the crowd murmurs in confusion while the brown-haired man is shocked by what happened. The protagonist collapses, exhausted, onto the red-haired girl's shoulder, who admits she continues to be surprised by her younger sister. She pats her little sister's head, acknowledging defeat and saying she will keep her promise that Nadia may stay in the north. The sisters lovingly embrace as the protagonist apologizes and thanks her. A white-haired lady with an unusually shaped hairstyle rises, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, and declares Nadia Goldgate the winner of the duel. In front of the Grand Mansion, it is said to Her Majesty that it is time to depart. She thanks Duke Cartain for the hospitality, and he wishes her a safe journey back. With an air of mutual dislike, the protagonist's sister and Cartain shake hands without exchanging glances, while Arwen asks him to take care of her younger sister. Remembering something, the red-haired girl reaches into her pocket to give something to her sister. She places a golden key into Nadia's hands, Surprised, Nadia says she cannot accept it because the key is the symbol of the Gold Gate heir, but her sister says it doesn't matter. Astonished, Nadia says she could do many things with that key, even take a large loan of money. Arwen wishes for the Gold Gate family to serve as a shield to protect her, which is why she is giving her the key, saying it will be important to have such power in foreign lands. She pats her younger sister's head and asks her to promise she will take care of herself, and Nadia confirms she will. Soon the carriage departs while the protagonist and two others watch it disappear in the distance. The girl begins walking, seeming thoughtful but also tired. With her head lowered, sweat begins dripping from her forehead as she apologizes to the Duke. Her eyes look exhausted, and her face turns red as she grows dizzy. At that moment, with her hand on her chest, she collapses to the ground. The two men turn around, shocked by the sound of her fall. They see Nadia lying on the ground on her back and desperately shout her name. The Duke yells for the protagonist to open her eyes and cries for a doctor. A voice behind him says that won't be necessary, and he is startled. Turning around to see who said that, Isaac Dalton kneels beside them and says he will take care of her. Dalton lifts the girl into his arms while the Duke only watches. He thinks that, in that moment, many useless worries had passed through his mind given the current situation. Isaac says she has a fever and difficulty breathing because the recent challenge affected her health. With the beautiful girl in his arms, he kisses her forehead, lamenting her condition, while Cartain hesitates at the way the man looks at Nadia. Isaac rises with her in his arms, saying he will take her to her room, but is surprised when Cartain tells him to wait. And in a gracious tone, he says he will be the one to carry her upstairs. He carries her in his arms while climbing the stairs of the grand mansion. With her in his arms, he wonders if she had always been this light, and thinks the training truly affected her. Looking at the woman's sweaty face, he understands she is truly exhausted. From outside the mansion, we see Isaac and the Duke arguing about who should carry her, with Isaac saying that the one who pushed her into this state shouldn't be the one carrying her. They argue, and Cartain tells him he should be looking for medicine to treat her instead, accusing Isaac of having other intentions behind his persistence. Irritated, the silver-haired boy questions the brown-haired man, asking whether he truly didn't know the state Nadia was in. With a piercing stare, the Duke asks how Isaac, being her doctor, didn't know as well. Isaac gives a wide smile and says of course he knew, and that was why he volunteered to stay behind. In an elegant bedroom, the Duke places the protagonist on the bed and covers her with a blanket. He notices that the girl's hands are very injured. This reminds him of their training together, making him think he should have known the condition she was in, because he was the one who spent the most time with her. Holding Nadia's hands, he begs for her forgiveness. When the girl says something, he is caught completely off guard. He asks what she said and what happened, and she says she is not sick because of the baths. Not understanding much, he becomes very surprised. Soon he realizes she is only dreaming and is amused by the fact that she worries about baths even in her dreams. Gently stroking the protagonist's head, he says she is the strangest person he has ever met. Then he reflects, thinking he cannot stop imagining that she must be an angel sent to accompany him through his cursed life. Suddenly, we see Cartain drenched in blood, speaking about his curse and how after being soaked in what remained of his beloved horse and buried under piles of corpses, he became extremely sensitive to all odors, as if it were some kind of curse. His mother hugs him, expressing immense joy that he returned safely. But during the hug, he does not seem comfortable, appearing somewhat frightened. He concludes that the people and places he grew up with now felt unfamiliar, realizing that even running water and gusts of wind each had their own distinct scents. Soon, two servants of the mansion discuss how strangely the Duke was acting, since he yelled at servants and complained that the air smelled foul. And so, the people around him also began acting differently and cautiously toward the now irritable and turbulent Claude Cartain. An image of him stained in blood appears, labeled with the claim that the Duke had become a tyrant. Nadia appears saying that those things bothered her just as they bothered him, and he thinks a soulmate appeared out of nowhere. Walking up a staircase, she comments that it must have been difficult for him considering his position. Surprised, he keeps thinking that this someone brought light into his dark world. Smiling, she says that now there will be two of them and everything will be better, because he will have someone who understands him. Scratching his neck, he says his fondness for her grew into a feeling of comfort and that his mouth dried during training, giving him a sense of relief. In the distance, the protagonist calls out to the Duke, waving in his direction. With a big smile and many beautiful white flowers in her arms, she waves at Cartain. He waves back, and the blue-haired man beside him is surprised. Realizing this, Cartain withdraws his hand, looking a little embarrassed. Continuing his thoughts, he realizes the feeling evolved into something beyond comfort, and he is surprised to see something in his bathroom he had not noticed before. Curious, he opens the makeup box and finds a note inside. The note described an invention of truffle and pink salt toothpaste, and that in order to use it, it was essential to marry Nadia Goldgate. Closing the note, he wonders why she is trying so hard, questioning whether it is all because of his bathroom. But he considers another possibility while looking at the folded note. Looking at himself in the mirror, he thinks that maybe it could really be just because of him. Now he realizes this curiosity was born from his growing feelings for her as he brings her hand to his face. He kisses her hand, saying that she always questioned his intentions and wanted to know why he was kind to her even while rejecting her. Holding Nadia's hand, he says he is finally ready to answer her, so she needs to recover quickly. And that now that he has met someone who understands him, he doesn't think he can return to being alone again. Moonlight shines through the window as someone tells her to wake up and asks if she knows how he feels. Nadia struggles to see who is beside her, saying her heart is broken, while he strokes her face and calls her an adorable little kitten. Giving up on trying to see, her eyes grow too heavy, and she falls asleep again. The next morning, beautiful white birds fly past the window and sunlight shines from outside. The protagonist wakes up startled by what happened and curses out loud. Agitated, she ends up hitting the person beside her bed, and it was Isaac. Thinking it was just a dream, she is shocked to see she had attacked her doctor. When she asks if he's okay, he says yes and that he doesn't feel any pain. But clearly he is not okay, as his nose suddenly begins to bleed, and she panics and apologizes. Isaac says it's fine and that he is the one to blame for having a fragile nose. His expression shifts as he asks the protagonist how she is feeling, saying he was very worried about her ever since she fainted while she sits holding a vase of flowers in her hands. Throwing the vase up and catching it, she says she feels fine now and that sleeping did her a lot of good. Spinning the vase on her index finger, she asks what he is doing there if he was supposed to have departed earlier that day. He says that was the plan, but he couldn't leave her in the condition she was in. He adds that her sister didn't leave earlier that day but actually left 3 days ago, news that makes her freeze. Panicking, she lets the vase slip from her fingers and asks what he just said. Quickly, Isaac manages to prevent the vase from hitting the ground, catching it in the air. Surprised, she asks if she really slept for 3 days straight, and he confirms it. This information leaves her completely shocked. Depressed, she says her sister must have returned to take her home. She continues, saying things must have gotten worse here, explaining that her sister must have come back after hearing about her fainting, saying that her sister must have asked the Duke to consider Nadia's permission to stay in the north revoked. Confidently, she says her sister must have done something exactly like what she just described. Thoughtful, Isaac says she shouldn't worry about that, and she's surprised, asking why not. He explains that he sent a letter to Arwen requesting that he remain in the north together with the protagonist for her well-being. Relieved, Nadia thanks him for what he did, saying that it was very kind of him, and he gives her a grateful smile. Then he remembers she said something about a kitten earlier and assumes she must have dreamed of one, which makes her recall it. She says it must have been a dream and hopes that's all it was, and Isaac says it must have been a very pleasant dream. While Isaac is distracted, saying how much he adores feline friends, the protagonist is thinking that it couldn't have been him. Wondering who it might have been, she considers Herzan, imagining the boy with cat ears and a tail calling her his precious kitten and himself her handsome cat. Yet she immediately discards the idea. Darkly, she considers the possibility that it was Cartain, but dismisses it because he is too masculine and composed to say such things, imagining him in a sensual pose wearing a robe, questioning why she imagined him in such an attractive way, and wondering if that is what they call love, thinking to herself that she would like to see a bit more, just as someone in the real world calls out to her. It's Isaac, who says it is time for him to leave. Nadia quickly grabs his hand and asks if he knows where the Duke is at that moment. With an indifferent look, Isaac asks if the Duke had been troubled because of her. His hand loosens as Nadia squeezes it, and he says she has gotten too close to him lately, saying he can answer her question, but given her current condition, it's better if he doesn't. In that moment, she notices a strange sort of darkness in his expression and regrets not recognizing it sooner. As he releases her hand, she asks what he means by that. She quickly stands and moves toward him, telling him to speak and assuring him she will be fine. Isaac turns his face away, showing an indifferent expression, saying the Duke wasn't there, and that on the night she fainted, he left and hasn't returned since. Surprised, she asks if she did something wrong, and Isaac replies, no, that something unfortunate happened to the duchy. With an indifferent face, he says it happened exactly when she lost consciousness. Frightened, she asks if Cartain is okay and where he might have gone. Isaac says he went to investigate the matter personally and they haven't received news yet. He moves closer, taking her hand and asking if she is truly worried about him. Nadia is startled by Isaac's behavior, thinking she has never seen him act this way before, that she always felt comfortable around him, but now he almost seems like a stranger. At that moment, someone knocks on the bedroom door asking permission to enter, saying it's Julianne, and Nadia allows her in. Suddenly, a woman in maid clothing enters the room calling for the protagonist. Seeing Nadia standing, Julianne celebrates with her that she is awake, whispering in Nadia's ear that the Duke asked her to inform Nadia that when she woke up, she could use his office. Then she tells her to take a basket from her hand, and Nadia asks what it is. Julianne answers that it is the bath oil she had mentioned before, and that she tried making it herself. Noticing Isaac's sinister expression upon hearing the word bath, she thanks him for having taken care of her again. Hiding the oil, she thinks it is against her principles to have someone who dislikes baths by her side, saying that she will take better care of herself so she won't have to see him so often. With a dissatisfied look, he questions the fact that she wouldn't need to see him often, and says he is happy he had the chance to see her smile again. saying that he will let her rest as he leaves the room. Then Nadia and Julianne go to the bathtub while the protagonist bathes, saying it feels very good, and the maid stands outside saying she is glad to hear that, confessing that she felt excited to take care of the protagonist's bath, which surprises her. The beautiful maid says that isn't all, blushing. She says she can't help but smile every time she puts on clean sheets, and that sometimes she buries her face in freshly washed linen to smell the warmth of the sun. She implies that it sounds a little strange to smell the warmth of the sun, but Nadia says she understands what she means, adding that lately she feels a strange tingling in her heart whenever she looks at her clean, washed hands, and the protagonist again agrees. Nadia asks why Julianne doesn't try taking a bath herself, and the maid gets nervous, but Nadia says that a chef must taste the food to improve the flavor, saying that the same applies to baths, and the maid thinks about it, finding the words quite convincing. Convinced, she says she will think about it, and the protagonist celebrates. Leaving, Julianne says she will leave the oil and the towel for her and that if she needs anything, she should just call, while Nadia enjoys her bath. Thinking about how Claude said she could use his office, she wonders if that also meant she could use his bathroom whenever she wanted. Splashing her arms in the water, she thinks he is taking care of her and was definitely interested, thinking she can't believe it and that she was very happy. In her excitement, she ends up knocking over the jar of oil. It bounces away from the bathtub. She thanks God the bottle didn't break, and sees in the distance her bath oil spilling on the bathroom's elegant floor. Leaving the tub to retrieve the bottle, she comments that she is having some kind of déjà vu, as the sound of a door opening echoes from afar. A foot steps inside, approaching the bathroom. Crouched down, she sees someone entering without noticing her presence. Lifting her head, she thinks it is Julianne and starts apologizing for the oil. But when she looks up, she sees Duke Cartain wearing nothing but a bathrobe, and he freezes. Startled by her, he closes his robe. Also startled by the Duke's arrival, she closes her robe as well. Both begin apologizing, with her saying she heard he was away, and him saying he did not expect to see her there. Turning around, he says he will leave and let her stay, but he slips badly on the spilled oil. Falling in surprise, not understanding anything, Nadia panics trying to help him, running at full speed toward him. She tries to catch him as he falls, throwing herself forward, but without much success because he hits the floor and she realizes her hand is on Cartain's thigh. Falling into complete panic because she almost touched the Duke's thing. The two stare at each other, completely terrified by the situation, their faces burning red with embarrassment. The Duke quickly gets up while Nadia looks at him, frozen. He walks away in a very clumsy manner while the protagonist remains kneeling on the floor. Climbing the stairs backward, still in shock, Cartain freezes when the blue-haired man enters calling for him. Seeing his state, the man asks what he is doing. They stare at each other, not understanding the situation. Giving an order for him to leave, the man is perplexed and says he will return another time, closing the door. Watching the man leave, the brown-haired man continues going upstairs. He remains paralyzed with nervousness after the man leaves the room. A few moments later, we see the large mansion from the outside, with ornate windows and a beautiful roof. Nadia and the Duke are sitting in a room facing each other, both with lowered heads, when Nadia calls for the Duke with a red face. He, at the same moment, also calls for the protagonist. She tells him he may speak first, but he insists she should speak. Apologizing for spilling her bath oil in the bathroom, she asks if he was hurt, though speaking without a clear idea, as if her mind were elsewhere. He says he is fine and that he should be the only one apologizing, since he should have been more careful so that situation wouldn't happen, concluding that he wanted to see her awake and well, but did not imagine it would be in that way. He continues, asking if she feels well enough to take a bath, showing concern. The protagonist lets out a small laugh, and he asks what is funny. With a big smile on her face, she simply says she is happy and thanks him, leaving him unsure why. She says it is because he showed concern for her health, mentioning that he instructed Julianne to inform her that she could use his bathroom. The Duke looks confused, asking if he really instructed that. Ignoring Cartain's confusion, she says she is completely fine and flexes her arms to show her muscles, and the Duke internally questions whether he is supposed to see something there. Saying that enough talking about her, Nadia asks how the Duke is doing. Not understanding, he says that if she is talking about the slip, he already said he is fine. Worried, she says she heard that something happened in the duchy right when she fainted, asking what happened and if it had anything to do with her. Setting his cup on the table, Cartain says he hopes she wouldn't find out, but since she knows, he begins talking about a place called the Kingdom of God, believed to be a land governed by God, and that the moment she fainted, the wrath of God erupted there. He received the news the morning after she fainted, showing that he asked Julianne if Nadia showed any signs of waking up, and she said no. When suddenly Herzan entered through the door calling him and saying it was an emergency. Herzan whispered in his ear that they received reports that the ground was shaking and water jets were erupting from the place where they built the altar, and people were claiming the water was hot as a sign of God's anger. The Duke was surprised while Herzan continued saying they blamed him for the wrath, accusing him of endangering Nadia and causing her fainting. When Herzan asked if he should investigate, he offered himself, but Cartain said he would go personally. Arriving at the location, they saw a large amount of water releasing steam as if it were boiling. Asking if this was the manifestation of wrath, hers unconfirmed. Cartain asked if no one had any idea why this happened or how the rumor about the protagonist began, and Herzan said he had not discovered that. The Duke simply said he understood with an objective expression. He crouched down, thinking he couldn't stop feeling that something was wrong, and that he understood the rumors about his baths and why people feared this phenomenon. But speaking about Nadia, he wondered why her fainting would be linked to him and to the water, and how that rumor spread, thinking he must consider the possibility that it was done deliberately. Suddenly, the two were startled by birds flying overhead. The ground began to shake, and Herzan said they needed to go somewhere safe. At that moment, silence fell, and the Duke wondered how it ended so quickly. His eyes widened, and he thought that this could be... At that moment, the water rose in an explosion. With a surprised expression, the protagonist asks the Duke if he really saw hot water coming from the ground. Nadia seems impressed as he confirms that yes, and that it happened at the same time she fainted, and says that if he had heard the rumor beforehand, he might also have believed she invoked God's wrath. With a smile, she asks if he really didn't think that, and he confirms she is right. He continues saying that at the moment the water erupted, he thought of her, and she points to herself in surprise, asking if he meant her, and he says yes, adding that when he remembered he now had someone who believed in him, all his fears vanished, saying that it was in that moment he decided to return, because he desperately wanted to see her. Still pointing to herself and surprised, she asks what he meant. Standing up, Cartain repeats that he desperately wanted to see her, and the protagonist is in complete shock. As he stands and walks, she wonders why he is being so direct when before he had only pushed her away. The Duke stops beside her, and nervously she tells herself that people don't change that quickly. She looks at him with a red face, and he sits next to her, making her even more nervous. While he is at her side, she wonders how she is going to explain something to him. With her hand on her chin, she says that the water coming out of the ground is not a sign of God's wrath. Surprised by her confidence, he asks if she knows something about it. Nadia jumps to her feet and says that this water is actually a geyser, saying it in an animated tone. The Duke doesn't seem to understand much and asks what that would be. She explains that it is a hot spring, a phenomenon where hot water comes out of the ground, and when it erupts from time to time, it's called a geyser. Like a student talking to a teacher, he asks if that means it is a natural phenomenon and not God's wrath, and she confirms it. Nadia also says she doesn't believe it was born from any sort of anger, but rather that it's a blessing. And he asks, surprised why she thinks that. Dancing slightly, she says that a hot spring works miracles for people's health, saying that if you bathe in one frequently, it reduces inflammation, improves blood circulation, and helps treat skin problems. While she stands there amazed, he sits with his arms and legs crossed, asking how she knows all that. Nadia is caught off guard by Cartain's question. Letting out a nervous little laugh, she says she likes reading rare and peculiar books while scratching her cheek with her finger. But then her expression shifts to a confident one, and she says they should use that to their advantage, and the Duke asks how. When she quickly sits beside him and extends her hand toward him. With a smile on her face, she says she will tell him, if he holds her hand. Suddenly, still with his arms crossed, he leans toward her, getting closer, which makes the protagonist blush. Looking into her eyes, he asks if it's something she can only say with him this close. Her face turning bright red, she averts her gaze and with a trembling voice begins saying that she has been courting him for a while now. Pulling back a little, he asks Nadia if she would lend her hand to him, and to House Cartain. Wearing a confident look and a small smile on his lips, he says he would like to ask for her help. The two walk side by side through a long, elegant corridor of the mansion. Arriving at Nadia's room door, she thanks him for accompanying her there, and he says it was to make sure she wouldn't faint again. Waving her hand, she says he doesn't need to worry because she is fine, and Dalton has checked on her several times, something the Duke does not seem pleased to hear. Crossing his arms, he asks if he was with her when she woke up, and not understanding the Duke's discomfort, she confirms it with a smile. The Duke lowers his face and brings his hand to it, and Nadia notices something is wrong, wondering if they fought or something. Her eyes sparkle when he says he was by her side until he had to leave, which makes her think he was the one who called her kitten. Then he says he would like to tell Nadia something. With a smile on her face, she says she also wants to talk and thinks it's time they address where their path is leading them. Smiling, Cartain says that apparently they are thinking the same thing. Nadia then suggests they say it together, counting to 3, and he agrees. Blushing, she begins counting from 1 until 3. She says he can, and he begins saying that they should. The protagonist finishes by saying that he can call her his kitten, and he finishes by saying that they should get engaged. Both look shocked by what the other said, clearly confused. With a confident smile, he says that kitten was unexpected and that he never imagined she wanted him to call her by a couple's nickname, and she panics. But he says it's a difficult task, yet he will try his best to call her his kitten, though she realizes it wasn't him who called her that night. He is putting a lot of effort into trying to call her by that nickname, but with an embarrassed scream, she turns away and begs him to stop, asking what that talk about getting engaged was if he had rejected her not long ago. Looking to the side, he confirms that, saying that the time she spent unconscious felt like an eternity to him, and that he longed to see the blue glow of her eyes again. It made him think about why he couldn't stop worrying about her. about God's wrath and its potential cause. He remembered her saying she would always be by his side and that she didn't believe he cared about the rumors, saying he tried to imagine what she would tell him if she were with him. And remembering an image of her with her blonde hair flowing and a beautiful smile on her face, he says he was an idiot for not accepting her proposal at the ball. Surprised? She says that was very sudden, and he says maybe his mind is finally catching up to his heart, that now he knows that the moment she became the only person in the world who could understand him, she became someone truly special, leaving her speechless. However, he asks her, at the beginning her proposal was because she wanted to bathe in his bathroom, but what about now? Asking if she loves him for who he is. Julianne is cleaning a table with a smile on her face while noises come from the other side of the door. Suddenly, the protagonist bursts out of the door running and shuts it forcefully. Sliding down the door with her back against it, sitting on the floor, she asks herself what just happened. When Julianne notices her there, nervous and sitting on the ground, approaching Nadia, the maid asks if she's okay, surprising the protagonist. Standing up and asking when she got there, Julianne replies she had been there for a while. Nadia then asks if she heard, and Julianne asks if she means her conversation with the Duke. Waving her hand, she says she supposes she heard him say he can't take his eyes off her because every part of her is too beautiful, and Julianne says he's absolutely right. The protagonist adds that he said he liked the idea of them getting engaged. Very excited, the maid asks her about the engagement part, and the startled protagonist asks if she didn't hear that part. Julianne says she didn't because their voices became muffled through the door, and Nadia exclaims excitedly that she will soon be engaged. The maid asks if that means they fell in love, and she starts explaining what happened. With her hand near her chest, Nadia remembers the Duke asking if she loves him for who he is, because he knew nothing about her back then, and he knew she had another motive for declaring her love that day. With her face lowered, she agrees, saying that if he's asking whether she feels love for him, she doesn't know how to answer. The Duke seems tense and startled by the response, but Nadia continues. Stammering a little, Claude can't understand, and then, embarrassed with her eyes closed, she says she has a crush on him. She talks about his beautiful orange eyes, his deep voice, his warm and steady hands, about the way he is gentle even when pretending not to be. With her hands covering her face, she adds that there is nothing she dislikes about him, and she can't help but feel drawn to him. She says she wishes she hadn't been so honest, tears forming in her eyes, already regretting her words. When he brings his hand close to hers and says that, just like him, taking both her hands, he says her warm smile, the way she is honest. Wiping her tears, he says everything about her is beautiful from head to toe, and that he discovered he was unable to take his eyes off her, adding that he also can't be sure whether what he feels is love or if he is obsessed with this strange tide of luck that appeared in his life. Holding her hands, he says that is why he wants to make her his fiancée. Placing her hand on his face, he asks if knowing the reason for his proposal makes her sad, and that he believes she was the one who said two people need to spend more time together to grow closer and develop feelings for each other. With her hand on his face, he says he will make a formal proposal, but he is not known for being patient. Pulling her by the waist to bring her closer, he asks if Nadia Goldgate would grant him the honor of becoming his wife. She steps out onto the balcony and thinks about how she loves the fresh scent of spring, though a cat is defecating right below her. Smiling with her hair blowing in the wind, she speaks of the warm breeze embracing her like a hug. But in truth, a strong wind shakes the trees in front of her. Julianne appears behind her, saying it's very cold, and asking what she's doing outside, reminding her that night air is colder in autumn. Coming back inside, the maid says she could catch a cold, and Nadia agrees, saying she absolutely cannot get sick, because she must not trouble Claude by falling ill again. Suddenly, they hear knocks on the bedroom door and are startled. It's the Duke, who steps inside and says he was on his way to dinner, asking if she would like him to accompany her, and Julianne is shocked that he came just to escort Nadia. Tucking her hair behind her ear, Nadia says yes, and the maid is surprised at how shy the protagonist suddenly looks. Amazed at how much the two have changed since the engagement proposal, the Duke is drinking from a beautiful glass and eating delicious food with gold-colored utensils. Suddenly, he looks toward the protagonist and gives a small smile, surprising her and making her blush. She puts a hand over her chest, embarrassed. He then hands her a plate, and she thanks him with bright eyes. With golden utensils as well, she begins tasting the delicious food. Astonished by the flavor, tears run down her beautiful face as she says it's sweet, but that Claude is sweet, not the food. Then suddenly, the Duke asks if Nadia has some time to spare for him after dinner today. She is completely shocked by Cartain's question. He adds that he still has to show her Nadan, and she is stunned, thinking he is really asking her out on a date. In her thoughts, she says she has all the time in the world for him. But aloud, she says she's a bit busy, yet can make time for him. Cartain proposes they meet near the entrance after dinner, and Nadia says that would be perfect. Suddenly, the door opens and someone steps into the luxurious dining hall. While the Duke is feeding Nadia, he tells Herzan, who just entered, that he can leave if it isn't urgent. However, bowing, Herzan says the investigation team has gathered on site and begun a meeting. Surprising Claude, the protagonist becomes indignant, thinking about what will happen to their date. Then she remembers she was so drunk on love that she forgot about the whole wrath of God situation. and she asks the subordinate if the team discovered anything about God's wrath, and hers confirms, saying she's very clever. So Claude approaches her and asks if she would be willing to lend her hand to House Cartain. Confident, she stands up quickly, placing a hand on the table, and says certainly. Seeing the grand mansion from outside, she says she will do everything she can to help. Some men argue, one saying they should deepen the investigation on a larger scale, while another asks if that's necessary, adding darkly that they could easily hunt down the rumor spreaders and teach them a lesson. Nadia notices the Duke's curious expression and asks if something happened. He answers no, that they are only deciding the direction of the investigation, and the protagonist says she understands. But she thinks the whole discussion is pointless since someone is being accused of causing God's wrath because of a simple hot spring. Then one of the men asks why the protagonist is participating in their meeting. The Duke pulls her to his side, wrapping an arm over her shoulders, and says, with a smile on his face, that he is engaged to the lovely Nadia. The protagonist is completely enchanted as he admits it in front of everyone. Everyone murmurs among themselves, shocked and trying to process this new information. Making a respectful curtsy with her skirt, she says she knows she is not officially his fiancé yet, but she would like to help however she can. She then asks what people are saying about the reason God is supposedly angry. A man wearing a hat says they are claiming it was caused by Duke Cartain's behavior, and Nadia questions him further. He continues, saying people insist Claude bathed in contaminated waters, thus interacting with the devil himself, and they claim the Duke is under demonic influence, and that this demonic hand even reached the one who received God's blessing. Completely shocked, she asks if they are seriously calling him a degenerate just because he took a bath, without even considering the part about interacting with the devil. But then she realizes something and asks Cartain who exactly this person blessed by God is. Then, without anyone saying a word, they all look directly at her. With a smile on her face, she points to herself and asks if it's really her. Scratching her cheek awkwardly, she says that supposedly she is the one God blessed, but she can't understand how or why. Herzan then says they heard she was unconscious for a long time and miraculously recovered, and Nadia confirms. He continues, adjusting his glasses, and says they also heard she had been visiting the temple to offer prayers of gratitude, but she starts explaining her side of the story, and in her thoughts completes that she was actually expressing resentment, not gratitude. Then a man wearing a chef's hat and holding a pig in his arms raises his hand, saying there's one more thing she should know. He adds that people say the water is boiling because God became furious with the sins of the devil, and the protagonist questions that. Inside a carriage heading toward a village, the Duke says that to find the source of the rumor, they must visit the meeting point of a suspicious gathering. Inside the carriage, the protagonist asks if he knows why those people are meeting today. He answers that they intend to determine the severity of the rumor and gather people for their cause. Nadia looks out the window, seeming lost in thought without saying anything. Claude notices her expression and asks if she's all right, and she answers that she is fine, just thinking. She wonders why people have such strong aversion to baths, and the Duke replies that this negative view of water likely always existed. Nadia is surprised that there's an actual reason behind it, and Cartain continues, saying that according to historical records, there was once a plague that devastated the continent 100 years ago, and rodents carrying the disease died en masse, while other monsters that fed on infected corpses attacked humans relentlessly, before dying in agony themselves. Blood and secretions filled every part of the world and soon reached the water reservoirs. He adds that only when the Mage Tower used the flame of purification to burn everything contaminated did the world finally find peace again. The dark water that people called the water of death was purified as well. Not understanding, Nadia asks if that means the water is safe now and people could bathe, since the disease is gone. Reflective, the Duke says the disease was never completely eradicated, and that it was the medical council that began the campaign to stop all bathing. He continues, saying they claimed infection occurred through people's pores during baths, and Nadia is shocked by the information. She then remembers Isaac saying baths were forbidden and that they were responsible for her frequent fainting spells. The protagonist wipes her face, thinking the Duke had only wanted to stay clean, and they turned him into some sort of demon because of it. But Claude tells her she has nothing to worry about, since it seems impossible to contract such a disease from God's wrath. And Nadia agrees. With a determined look, she thinks everything is about how convincing someone can be. Suddenly, she places her hands on the Duke's crossed legs and tells him not to worry, because she will solve this problem for him, no matter what it actually is. But then the carriage runs over a rock on the road, launching her forward toward Claude, mouth open, screaming. She ends up falling into the Duke's arms, who catches her tightly. Realizing what just happened, she becomes completely embarrassed and red-faced. With the Duke still holding her in his arms, he says he appreciates her desire to help. Placing her seated beside him, he tells her to try to avoid getting so enthusiastic, and she nods, face burning. She says she will keep that in mind, still thinking about the moment she was in his arms. Claude glances at her reflection in the window, completely flustered, and gives a confident smile. But she recomposes herself and tells him that if he is getting hopeful, she will try her best in everything she can, but she cannot die for him. Surprised, he says he would never expect that kind of sacrifice and asks what kind of romances she has been exposed to. Then he adds that all he wants is for her to stay safe. Resting his shoulder lightly against hers, he finishes by saying he wants that while she is by his side. A sign of a classic tavern comes into view. They enter disguised with hooded cloaks, and Nadia says there are many people there, and that not all of them could be responding to this so-called wrath of God. Herzan says he doesn't know, but with a smile he tells her she should take a spoon. She turns around suspiciously and asks if she looks suspicious. The Duke averts his gaze while the subordinate silently shakes his head. So Nadia takes a spoonful of food and, embarrassed, blows on it to cool it down. When she hears a noise inside the tavern, she ends up blowing much harder by accident. Someone suddenly climbs aggressively onto one of the tables. A man wearing a cloak and hood similar to theirs stands on the table while people murmur and tell the tavern keeper to get him down. The man begins to speak, saying he brings terrible news to everyone. In a frightening tone, he claims a great danger is about to fall upon them from the north. While Nadia startles at the situation and drops her spoon, Claude simply watches as if analyzing everything calmly. With a sinister smile, the man talks about jets of boiling water erupting throughout the kingdom, saying it means God is unleashing his wrath upon the land. Nadia thinks that they finally found the place. Raising a finger upward, he says the stories about the obsession with water were true and that the Duke had been brainwashed by the devil himself. A woman stands up saying that's impossible and that he would never do something like that, while another agrees, saying she doesn't believe the man. He asks how she can be so sure and says they should not ignore the signs of God's wrath. Upstairs, other hooded figures listen as something repeatedly taps against a table. One of them keeps tapping his finger and says something terrible may happen if the situation continues. A long-haired, red-haired person stands up, saying that according to what he heard, the noblewoman, blessed by God, also became sick because of the devil, which shocks Nadia. The hooded man continues, saying a tragedy like this happening during an age of prosperity raises concerns about the future of the North. Some men talk among themselves. One says his son has been sick in recent days. Another mentions the poor harvest due to severe drought. Nadia realizes this is how they have been stirring up the population. She looks toward her beloved Duke to see if he's all right, but he wears an indifferent expression. He smiles and tells her not to worry, because he is perfectly fine. He continues calmly enjoying the hot meal before him, leaving Nadia surprised. She thinks to herself that this must be why romance heroines fall in love in these stories, but she still tells him not to mind the nonsense they're saying, and Claude agrees. Stomping on the table, the hooded man demands everyone's attention. He says what they should truly fear is the wrath of God swallowing all of Nadan, which terrifies everyone. He continues, saying that in the end the entire north will be flooded by boiling water and eventually turn into flames, making people ask if they're all going to die. Horrified, the protagonist thinks that no one is going to die. This is a romance story, not an apocalypse. Annoyed, she thinks about how frustrating this all is while the Duke and Herzan eat calmly. Then someone says he suggests they enact God's wrath, making Nadia freeze. Another man stands up and shouts that the Duke must end his dealings with the devil. Another hooded figure says he must seek forgiveness until the wrath of God subsides, and yet another agrees in the background. With a grin, the man says they must also receive help from the temple. With a determined look, the protagonist thinks, this is what we came for. They're finally about to say what they claim is the solution. The red-haired person upstairs asks what would happen if the Duke refuses their demands, surprising Nadia. She turns to see who said that and thinks this man has been irritating her the entire night. Remembering she saw him earlier, she wonders if he wasn't wearing glasses before. As people murmur among themselves, saying the Duke would never do that and that he is a war hero who will resolve everything and kneel before God. Someone shouts, "Enough," and asks if they truly believe what they're saying, insisting the water jets are proof. Nadia calls to the other two, saying they should follow the red-haired man, with the Duke agreeing and telling Herzan to assign someone to follow him. Herzan signals to two hooded men sitting at a table right behind them, and they signal back. Then the three of them begin leaving the tavern together. Outside the tavern, three men in black clothing can be seen talking and laughing. The protagonist says she hopes they catch the instigator, and Herzan says the investigation team is following them and will capture them soon. He asks Nadia if she managed to find any clues on how to put an end to the rumors. With a confident look and a smile, she says yes, and that if they're going to involve God, then they will do the same. She tells Herzan that he needs to spread rumors that she is sick, and he gives an awkward smile, not understanding, saying that it would only make things worse because everyone already believes her illness was the devil's doing. She insists it's fine. She adds that this is exactly what she wants to happen. Leaving hers unshocked, the Duke smiling and her standing determined and confident, she says she will show them how incitement is supposed to be done. The scene shifts to a beautiful bridge where someone calls out the names Cassiana and Ian, and two children come running, saying they're there. Their worried mother says they shouldn't be walking around the kingdom of God because it's dangerous. But the boy smiles and says there were other people there. His sister agrees, saying they were praying to God with their hands together, and their mother wonders who would do that. Suddenly, a person in long robes appears and says he saw it too, and that he used to visit the place alone until someone began accompanying him. He says the two looked quite exhausted, but their expressions grow brighter day by day. And then we see they're talking about Claude and Nadia. People in the background murmur, asking if someone was inside the water and who would do something so dangerous. Claude says maybe it would be better if he came alone starting tomorrow because he worries about Nadia's health, and she wipes her nose with a handkerchief. But with a sickly expression, she says she could walk thanks to these visits. She asks him to continue coming and says she'll offer prayers on her own, making the people around them murmur. Meanwhile, she thinks that now everyone's eyes are on him and that it's time for the show to begin. Earlier that morning, we see the Duke's grand, luxurious mansion, and someone asks Nadia what she thinks. Holding a beautiful mirror, she looks at herself, analyzing how she looks while Julianne waits for the verdict. Smiling, she turns around, showing the dark eye circle makeup and sickly look, saying she might still look too alive, which scares the maid. The protagonist says maybe they should add more powder, and Julianne can't believe what she's hearing. Determined, Julianne grabs the powder case and says she's a maid with 5 years of experience, and that she is ready for this challenge, for her honor and pride, with a confident smile. Then she begins applying the makeup while criticizing her own work, saying it still isn't good enough. Julianne applies makeup on Nadia's cheek, and Nadia suggests darkening the area below her mouth, saying, just a little more, just one more time, just one more touch. Julianne looks like she's in some kind of battle. Wiping sweat from her forehead, she asks the protagonist what she thinks now. Nadia looks at herself in the mirror and, impressed, says it's perfect, and asks where the Duke is when someone knocks on the door, and Julianne says it must be him. Claude opens the door, saying he came to accompany his beloved, and asks if she is ready. He looks toward her, who is turned slightly to the side. Turning and smiling toward him, her face is so pale and sickly that she looks like a ghost. The Duke freezes when he sees her, and she greets him with a, "Good morning." He immediately takes steps backward out of the room while the two women fail to understand what's happening. He shuts the door forcefully, startling both women. They laugh nervously, and the protagonist asks Julianne if she thinks it was too much. And Julianne says she could easily be friends with the ghost, frightening Nadia. Cartain stands silently outside the room, sweating. Back at the Kingdom of God, Claude asks if she's all right, and she answers she still feels very weak and leans on him. From afar, people comment that she looks very sick and talk about how pale she is, saying that must be why he comes to pray every day. A man comes running toward them, asking if he can offer help, and the Duke asks who he is. The green-haired man introduces himself as Gale, and says it's a pleasure to meet them. He says he has seen him praying every day and always wondered the reason, and now he realizes it was because of Nadia. Saying he was very moved, the protagonist notices he seems to be suffering from some kind of skin condition. She wonders if he is receiving proper treatment for it, and thinks he seems like a good person. Looking at Nadia, the Duke asks if she would like to accept his help, and Gale thinks that name sounds familiar. The protagonist says Claude is fine and that she would like to make the journey herself, which makes Gale think the name Claude seems very familiar. He finally realizes they are Duke Cartain and Lady Nadia. The Duke tells him he appreciates it but prefers to continue their journey on their own, surprising everyone. But he says maybe he can help by dispersing the crowd since they wanted peace for their prayers, something Gale accepts instantly. People in the background comment that was the Duke of the North, and now they understand why he seemed familiar. They say they've heard rumors that the water jets were God's blessing, and others say they've heard the same. Gale folds his hands together and says he'll believe that's the case and hopes Nadia recovers from her illness. Because if her prayers become real, he says while looking up hopefully, he continues saying that means people like him can hope for the same. While he sneezes, the protagonist thinks she feels a little guilty, and Cartain asks if he is sick. Water from a beautiful waterfall falls over the rocks, leaving the protagonist amazed by the scenery. She tells Claude that the place is beautiful, and he says it is strangely beautiful. With a smile, he says that when he was alone in that place, he didn't really think much about the beauty of it, leaving Nadia speechless. The protagonist says anyway everything is going well, and the Duke says yes, and that her judgment seems to have been correct. This makes her feel very good about herself. Back outside the tavern, the protagonist says the water jets will continue regardless of what Cartain does, and because of that, they will use God to shake the foundations of the malicious rumors, surprising Herzan. She concludes by saying they will spread that the jets, instead of being God's wrath, are actually his blessing. Back at the Kingdom of God, Claude says that was a great idea and that they make excellent partners in crime, which makes Nadia jump with joy. But she freezes midair thinking about what he said regarding partners in crime. Turning toward him, surprised, she wonders if he is really thinking about their marriage while imagining the Duke dressed in white with a golden ring in his hand, inviting her to a honeymoon at the hot spring. With her jump, she stumbles and loses her footing. Not understanding what is happening and with Claude shocked, she begins to fall toward the hot spring water while Cartain lifts his arm to try to catch her. Suddenly we see the water, but it is calm, and no one has fallen in. Then we see that our dear Duke Cartain caught the protagonist in his arms. Suddenly we see Nadia not understanding why she didn't fall into the water, and the Duke begins to speak. We see he is kneeling in the water while looking at the protagonist, saying it seems she won't let him take his eyes off her. With Claude looking worried, she says she's sorry and that she will start being more careful. Looking away, she says she knows the plan would fail if she got hurt, and that she cannot take a bath. She adds that she let herself get carried away, but Cartain quickly interrupts, saying she misunderstood. He says that actually he is worried about her well-being, making the protagonist's eyes shine, and he says he does not want to see her faint again, with a look that makes the protagonist burn inside. As the two leave the water, Nadia asks the Duke to put her down and mentions his shoes are wet. With her trembling slightly, Claude begins to lower her to the ground while saying she seems sensitive to touch. But he takes her hand and says that nervousness comes from a lack of familiarity with something. Continuing, he says that the only thing that can help her stop trembling, looking at her with a love-struck expression, he finishes by saying that it's him. Then his lips begin to move closer while they are still holding hands. Suddenly, a loud noise reaches them, and a huge burst of water shoots up from where they had just been standing. This frightens both of them intensely. The protagonist wonders if this is what people call the wrath of God. The two remain holding hands, and a beautiful rainbow can be seen in the background. Suddenly, the water settles, and silence takes over. Nervous, the protagonist thinks this was the perfect moment for a kiss, but then she pushes the Duke's face away with her hand and points at the rainbow, and the Duke says it was already there earlier. Changing the subject, she says the water seems to erupt every 5 minutes as she points to an imaginary watch on her wrist. Claude then says that since they're already there, they might as well wait to see how long until the next eruption. While Cartain picks up some kind of vial, she starts saying they should do that and raises her hand near her face. But as she does, she notices something on her glove. Shocked, she sees it stained with her makeup and says the hot water must have made it melt. Knowing no one can see her without makeup, she begins trying to hide her face, making the Duke curious. He tries to approach her, asking if something happened. Then she suddenly throws herself into the Duke's arms, hugging him tightly, and asking if they could stay like that for a moment, which startles him. He looks down at her with her head pressed against his chest and seems to think about something. Realizing the issue, he comes up with a solution. Suddenly, he lifts her into his arms, surprising the protagonist. He says they should let her rest with her face buried in his arms. And then, after that day, a new rumor began spreading, and we see the front of the Duke's grand mansion. Herzan arrives in a room where the two are sitting and says the plan was a success and that the narrative they created is spreading among the people. The narrative being that the love-struck Duke prayed to God every day, asking for his beloved to recover. Then, God was moved by his prayers and decided to grant him a wish. With God saying it was the 101st time he was making the offer and asking Claude if he heard him, and Claude saying he didn't hear anything. Seeing a water eruption behind the Duke as he prayed, God supposedly responded with a blessing. And the Duke and Nadia, who had begun showing signs of improvement, were visiting the kingdom of God and always returning with water from the spring in their hands. Herzan says many people have been gathering at the kingdom of God hoping for the same blessing, and Nadia smiles, saying it's great news. But she asks why Herzan seems more exhausted each day. He answers that he's been having nightmares every night about Arwen storming the mansion after hearing that her sister was sick. The Duke then says he will only suffer for one more night, and after the announcement they'll make at the kingdom of God, he can take a leave of absence. Calmly drinking tea, he adds that even if the protagonist's sister decides to visit, it's something he will deal with. The next day, we see Julianne in Nadia's room asking how she'd like her face to look today. Looking in the mirror, the protagonist says that since this is the big day, she needs to look strong and healthy but natural at the same time. Having a sudden flashback of the past, she says she wants to look radiant but humble. Realizing she's asking for too much, she apologizes to the maid who says she will do her best. Combing the protagonist's hair, Julianne says that after today's announcement, she believes rumors will be on their side. Smiling, Nadia says she hopes everything goes according to plan. She remembers she hasn't seen Isaac recently, and Julianne says she saw him around the mansion, but that he seemed busy. She says she actually has something to tell the protagonist, who asks what it is. She says it's about Viscount Dalton and that she happened to be in the library, but she is interrupted when the door opens. Herzan enters nervously, telling Nadia he has terrible news, that they have a problem, which surprises Nadia and the maid. With the Duke and Nadia in the room, she seems shocked by something. Herzan begins explaining that the investigation team tracked down the instigator of the meetings, and that they ended up finding him, but he was already dead, which leaves Nadia with her mouth open and Claude with a neutral expression. Claude asks about the man who stood on the table first, and Herzan replies that he was found and said he had been paid to do that, adding that shortly after, he died of a sudden seizure. Nadia thinks that the only two people who could have led them to the instigator were dead, and that the only thing they could do now was carry out the plan without flaws. She calls for Herzan and for Duke Cartain, saying she has something she would like to discuss with them. Nadia goes down the stairs lost in thought while Julianne accompanies her. She wonders who could be behind this and thinks the culprit seems far more dangerous than she imagined. Julianne, who is right behind her, asks if she's okay, and she replies she's just a little nervous. As someone else walks up the stairs, the maid tells her not to be nervous because she's by her side and has great faith in Nadia. Someone says it's been a while, surprising Nadia. Nadia recognizes the person's voice. It was Isaac. He comes up the stairs saying he had heard she would announce her engagement that day. Nadia thinks it's good to see him, but the timing is bad because she fears he'll try to stop her because of the rumors, so she nervously confirms it. Isaac says, of course he knows, because even the servants seemed very interested, which makes Nadia ask why. With a smile, Isaac says it's because everyone loves a good love story and can't stop talking about how attentive the Duke is to her. Nadia dislikes that everyone's attention is on their love story. Isaac continues, saying he helped put an end to the rumors about the Duke and the devil, and that the Duke is not happy about her getting near water. However, this time, he says the Duke must smile and endure it, which relieves Nadia. But Isaac adds that in return, he wants her to promise she will put an end to the rumors surrounding House Cartain, and she agrees. Then he continues up the stairs, saying goodbye to Nadia, while she thinks he's adorable and feels guilty for having suspected him. She then remembers Julianne had something to tell her about Isaac. Julianne hesitates and seems to think for a moment. Looking at Isaac, she thinks she must have been mistaken, since he seems like a good person and the protagonist trusts him, and she shouldn't give Nadia any reason to worry, so she says it's nothing. Nadia complains that she forgot what she was going to say. Suddenly, the grand, beautiful doors open. On the other side stands Duke Cartain in a white suit, looking back. Seeing Nadia in a beautiful white bridal dress with daisies in her lovely blonde hair. They stand side by side, and the Duke calls her to go, and she says yes with a big smile. Facing each other, Nadia beams at him. Then the two begin walking among the guests while being applauded, and Nadia waves to everyone. A girl with large glasses sees Nadia looking healthy and thinks she seems better than before. Meanwhile, a boy with mottled skin says they are there to speak of God's miracle, and Tanya asks what he means. He says he's certain because the person standing over there is the high priest, Navette, as we see a handsome man with a large cross necklace saying it's a great honor to be there. Tanya, smitten, looks at him and says he's very charming, and a hooded Julianne agrees. We hear murmurs in the crowd about whether these water jets are a blessing from God, and others saying they should not accept it because the devil could be deceiving them. Then someone says they should be careful with their words because they're talking about the Duke and the high priest. Nadia peeks with one eye toward where the discussion is happening and thinks that just as she planned, she was right in inviting the high priest for today. Cutting to earlier that day, we see Nadia saying she has a request and that it's necessary to ask for the temple's help. That if they involved the temple, talk of demons would definitely appear, and she asks if there's any way they could help. The Duke looks thoughtful. He says House Cartain could make a formal request for the temple to bear witness, and Herzan says it's a great idea. Returning to the ceremony, the high priest asks what the Duke wishes to proclaim before God, while the two are kneeling. Claude Cartain says he would like to thank him for blessing them with another miracle. The priest then asks Nadia, and she says she also wishes to thank him for his blessings. He then raises his staff and says he asked them, with the staff lifted high and the two kneeling before him, what they are grateful for. The Duke then says he knows the water jets were not a sign of God's wrath, and that in fact, they are the opposite, because they are his answers. Surprising the crowd, he says he knows this because he experienced this same miracle in the past. Standing, he says that during the war, he was drenched in monster blood and haunted by the most distressing images. That he was overwhelmed by a feeling of terror toward everything, which causes commotion and concern among the crowd. With a serious expression, he says that included himself, for he felt as if the devil were tempting him, and so he knelt and prayed desperately, begging that he bring salvation and cleanse him of all that terror. Everyone is extremely shocked by the Duke's declaration. The high priest then asks if God gave him an answer. Claude Cartain says that yes, without a doubt. Murmurs rise among the crowd, and Nadia becomes excited, thinking they are convincing them. He says that not long after, water jets surged from the earth and rained over him, washing away the blood and violence that tormented him, adding that he witnessed monsters fleeing from the very spot the water emerged, saying that it was then he realized it was God's answer, blessing him with this miracle. To his surprise, he stopped seeing those distressing images from that day onward. The high priest then says that this explains his frequent baths. The Duke says yes, because he wanted to remember God's answer to his prayers. And since he cannot recreate the water eruptions, the best he can do is bathe, all for the sake of his inner peace. And Nadia looks at him with a smile. Then the two look at each other with confident smiles, nodding. With Nadia turning back, he says he discovered the water jets had appeared again in the realm of God. As she takes a little pouch of sea salt and toothpaste from her bag, he says that when Nadia fell ill, that he gave her the same blessing, and he will be eternally grateful, while Nadia puts toothpaste in her eyes to simulate crying. Startled that she still isn't ready, he continues saying that he granted this second miracle, saving the girl of his dreams. Becoming paralyzed, he stammers that he is sincerely grateful. And then Nadia says she feels emotional, but that she should be the one thanking God for healing her with his blessing as her eyes stream with tears. Everyone in the crowd says the story is touching, and a disguised Julianne celebrates the success of the plan. Even the high priest becomes emotional with tears falling from his eyes, saying he is certain God heard their gratitude, and asks if they wish to say anything else. The Duke kneels beside Nadia and says they would like to ask for something. He asks the high priest to give his consent for him to marry Nadia so that his blessings may extend to all those in need, he says. and then a water jet erupts, leaving everyone completely astonished. Nadia then throws herself into the Duke's arms, saying it was God's blessing. Meanwhile, in another beautiful and grand mansion that was not the Duke's, tea is served as someone wonders how Nadia is doing, revealing two elegant people talking, and the man tells his wife she must be well, and that no news can only mean good news. Then someone bursts through the door shouting that a letter from the north has arrived. A letter sealed in red wax is handed over. Worried, the lady asks if something happened to her, and the man says certainly not, and that the letter must be to say how well she is. However, the letter said that the insane Duke of the North announced his engagement to Nadia Goldgate before an entire assembly of people. The woman asks if she is engaged to Duke Cartain, and the man says she only went there to participate in the festival. Then another person says that perhaps House Cartain manipulated Nadia for their own benefit. This person is a handsome man in elegant white clothes holding a purple rose, saying the rumors about the Duke were the most malicious, showing his peculiar earring, his vibrant yellow eyes, and his white hair. His name is then introduced as Lupin Goldgate, the youngest son of the Goldgate family and a mage of the tower. His parents think this flashy behavior of his has increased ever since he joined the Mage Tower. Lupin apologizes for arriving this way and says he wouldn't have come like this if the matter didn't concern his sister, and the mother asks if the contents of the letter are true. He says some parts seem exaggerated, but he has indeed heard that the Duke is different. The parents become alarmed, asking what he means, wondering what it could be. Then Lupin says that Cartain developed a sudden obsession with baths, and because of that, rumors circulated that he was going mad under the devil's influence. Adding that those rumors seem to have faded, but the worries were different now, he says while biting his lips. He says that Nadia has been encouraging the Duke's obsession with baths, which shocks his parents. His father then stands up and says this is absurd, and that baths are off limits, especially for Nadia. Turning to his wife, he says they must do something and should go north to check on their daughter. The woman asks what they will do if their daughter truly likes the Duke, and the man is left speechless. Lupin places his teacup on the table and stands, calling for his father and mother, saying he should go north along with his sister Arwen, and that they can place their trust in them, for they too detest reliving that terrible experience again. We see Nadia happily stepping out of an elegant carriage with Claude waiting outside, pretending he wasn't waiting for her. They hold hands, and Nadia throws herself into Duke Cartain's arms. Walking through the beautiful gardens, Claude says he heard she went to the realm of God with Julianne. He wipes off the bench for her to sit and asks how it went, and whether the place was still attracting much interest. Proudly, the protagonist says yes, that not only have the bad rumors faded, but people from other parts of the North and the Empire are now going there. With her head lowered and discouraged, she says they are still unsure about approaching the spring area, so most of them stop at the village. But she says she has great news because the village closest to the spring has seen a rise in tourism. The Duke says that truly is good news, and that the village had been neglected for far too long. Then he leans toward the protagonist and says, all of this is thanks to her. She thinks about how close they have become since announcing their engagement, but remembers she has something to tell him. She remembers seeing the high priest bathing in the hot springs today. Not fully grasping it, Claude asks if it was really the high priest bathing. Clearly jealous, he asks Nadia what he said, and she answers that his body seemed younger, his muscles, joints, and that he felt like a new person, which must be the effect of God's blessing. The priest then thanked Nadia for allowing him to receive this manifestation of God, and said she could call him if she ever needed help, and the protagonist thanked him. Nadia goes on, saying she found him very pleasant and charming and that he almost charmed Julianne, since her legs went weak. Then she notices Duke Claude's jealous look and freezes, realizing she just complimented another man in front of her fiancé. He then says it seems the high priest's charm had some effect on her, and she says it didn't, and that what she wanted to talk about was what the priest said about being indebted to her, and that she could ask for help whenever needed. The Duke then asks if she has any idea what went through his mind while she was away, that if he had known she was spending her time with another man, and she thinks he completely misunderstood everything. Claude then says perhaps he should delay the surprise he prepared for her, and she asks what surprise, asking if he really prepared something for her, and he asks where Herzan is, trying to change the subject. Herzan then appears from behind the bushes with a tired expression and dark under-eye circles. The protagonist asks how long he was there, and he says only for a moment, waiting for the right time to announce his arrival. Then the two position themselves in front of her, with the Duke taking her hand, and Herzan saying it was this way. With her eyes blindfolded and guided by Claude, Nadia enters the mansion. Her blindfold is then removed by Duke Cartain, who says they have arrived. Her eyes sparkle as she becomes impressed by what she sees. In front of her is a luxurious bathtub filled with hot water and flower petals floating on the surface. The Duke then says this was her very own private bathroom, and that he felt bad she always had to use the one in his office. The protagonist becomes emotional and runs toward the Duke with tears in her eyes, asking how she managed to find the most perfect man in the world. Throwing herself into the Duke's arms, he is confused by her emotional reaction, but eventually he smiles and wraps her in his arms. and the protagonist feels incredibly happy and warm inside, remembering all her efforts to keep this romance alive and realizing they finally paid off. Then Herzan cuts through their moment, reminding them he is still there, making the two separate quickly. Trying to change the subject, Nadia asks Claude if Julianne could also use the bath sometimes. He agrees, saying that if Julianne approves, it's fine. Herzan adjusts his glasses and asks if it's true a crowd is gathering at the realm of God. She says yes, and that the spring has earned a name, the healing waters of the Lord's grace. She adds that if she could only come up with a business idea, her life would be set. Herzan then asks about the business idea. The protagonist remembers she is supposed to be the daughter of a wealthy duchy, and that her life is already set. He asks if she has any ideas, and she denies it. So the Duke says Herzan has a big interest in commerce and she shouldn't be embarrassed. She then smiles and says she thought of a thermal water delivery service. Herzan adds the idea of hot facial masks and hand massages, and Nadia says she likes it. The two then celebrate, saying they'll make a lot of money with the hot spring. They continue talking eagerly about their ideas. But then Cartain takes Nadia's hand and asks if she isn't forgetting something. She tells Herzan they'll talk more later, and he quickly leaves the room. Apologizing to the Duke, she says she forgot he was there. The Duke whispers in her ear that he believes he deserves a reward, saying a reward that proves just how much she liked the surprise. But Nadia says she has nothing to give him. Then she asks what he thinks about traveling to the hot spring, just the two of them, and he is surprised at how quickly she learns. He adds that he would love that, but doesn't think that reward would be enough, and that there is something she can give him right there, at that very moment, something he would very much like to take for himself. Slowly approaching the protagonist's face, he finally gives her a passionate kiss. And that's it for today, everyone. After so much boiling water, jealousy, almost scandalous falls, and the kisses that finally happened, honestly, I'm exhausted just trying to keep up with this very hydrated Duke's love life. But tell me, what did you think of the story so far? Do you think this engagement is going to last, or are we headed for even more aquatic chaos? This wonderful story is called Shall We Bathe, Your Grace? And I covered it up to chapter 23. If you want a continuation, more romance, more chaos, more water shooting out of the ground, you know what to do. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you want to see in the next recap. Kisses, and see you next time.